Today's episode of James Bond Radio is dedicated to the memory of Lewis Gilbert, the man who not only took Bond into space, he also saved the entire series with the subject of today's podcast, The Spy Who Loved Me. I imagine Sir Roger was waiting for him at the pearly gates in his Lotus, and they're already off somewhere having adventures under the sea or out in space. Lewis Gilbert, we salute you. Hello and welcome to James Bond Radio. My name is Tom Sears and I'm joined by another fella, Mr. Dan Gale. Welcome to James Bond Radio, Dan.
Hello, Tom. How are you?
I'm doing I'm doing very well, thanks, buddy. Now, for those
that was a bit stilted, wasn't it?
It was, but it's all right. You're gonna be fine. Don't you worry. Now, for those who didn't listen to the end of the 4th birthday anniversary episode of JBR, Chris has gone on deep cover. He's away on a secret mission, away from the internet and social media for the next 3 months. So we've obviously put together some other stuff going on in the meantime while he's away on deep cover, which is obviously why you're on board, Mr. Dan Gale. So why don't you tell the people what we're doing today? What's going on?
The plan was, for those who don't know, right, first of all, I have to address the fact that I'm going to be constantly looking up here and looking down here. So for people watching on YouTube, I'm very bad at eye contact anyway, but even worse so when the person I'm talking to is down there. So I do apologize if I keep moving my eyes.
You've got the telly on in the background and you're just watching a bit of telly while we do this, right?
It's Jeremy Kyle. I can't get enough of it. So it was a couple of years ago now. I did a documentary that I'd always wanted to make about the Bond audiobooks and about the different releases, and Tom and Chris were kind enough to play that as part of an episode of JBR, I've been a big fan of the audiobooks for a long time, and that episode explained everything, my love for them. But there was 2 books. Now, I don't know about Trigger Mortis. I'm sure it has been released, but it hadn't been at the time that I did that. I don't think the book had even come out then. But there were only 2 Bond books that I could think of that had never been recorded as audiobooks. And they were the novelizations of The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker that Christopher Wood wrote. And I read them when I was younger, and I think they are cracking books. And it seems such a shame that no one ever recorded them as audiobooks. It's probably a rights reason. It's probably a legal reason why they haven't been recorded, because anything with Bond written on it is going to get produced and reproduced at some point because it's going to make money. So the reason why it hasn't been released is probably something very boring like that. Yeah. However, we thought we would give it a go. I don't know if we're allowed to, but we're going to give it a go.
Yeah, so I feel like as it's out of print, it's not like it's the brand new Bond book and we're sticking out an audio book before they can release one or anything like that. I feel like as fans, we're doing our best to be respectful, and at the same time, we sort of pay tribute to something which is actually really good. And I would wager that a lot of Bond fans probably haven't read this, because the novelizations of the films are one of those things that it's not something most people go to immediately, is it? You know, when you speak to most Bond fans, I would say they're typically first and foremost a fan of the films. And if that's not the case, then they're a fan of the original Flemings. And that's like the core of their Bond fanness, I would say. And I feel like something like a Christopher Wood novelization, which, you know, he wasn't sort of like a John Gardner or a Raymond Benson or whoever that was kind of carrying the torch. He was, you know, just kind of drafted in for these 2 novelizations. So he's a bit of a sort of like out of the box kind of person in the world of Bond, I would say. What are your thoughts on that?
Annoyingly, because I'm using my phone to talk to you on Skype, I can't actually call up all the information that I had been prepared about Christopher Wood. Well, I'll do that next time. But yes, he was a novelist, and he was a screenwriter and a novelist, and he worked very low key. He used to travel into London every day to get to his office, because he felt that working from home felt like he wasn't actually doing a job. So he would go out and rent an office, and he would tap out these books that eventually became the Confessions movies. So if you've heard of movies like Confessions of a Window Cleaner, Confessions of a Driving Instructor, Taxi Driver, Pop Performer, He wrote the screenplays for those as well. And I think he wrote something like 18, 19 novels as well based on them.
Yeah.
Under the name was Timothy Lee. That was the name that he used. And then various minor characters in those books spun off into other novel series as well. So he was a pretty prolific author. A lot of the stuff that he wrote wasn't that... it was popular. It wasn't winning Pulitzer Prizes or anything like that.
Yeah.
But, he knew his way around the page. He knew his way around a typewriter. There's a very strange and convoluted story towards the history of the script to The Spy Who Loved Me, which we'll go into, I guess, in a minute.
Mm. So
it's quite interesting that he won the gig at the end of the day, because he wasn't that well known.
Yeah.
But the book itself, yes, it's one of... How many novelizations have there been now? 4, 5, 6?
I'm thinking, okay, so I'm going back. I remember there was one of License to Kill, I believe. I remember an old John Gardner book on the shelf. There was definitely all the Brosnans were done. There was, I remember having, I didn't buy Die Another Day, but was there one of The World Is Not Enough? I remember having Tomorrow Never Dies and Goldeneye, but I don't know about The World Is Not Enough.
Yeah. So it'd be the 4 Brosnans, one of which was John Gardner. 3 of them were Raymond Benson. License to Kill, and Moonraker and The Spy Who Loved Me.
Yeah.
So that's 8.
Interesting.
No, 7.
Now, I tell you what I find quite intriguing about this, because until we'd done this, I haven't read the book at all. So it was kind of, it was one of those things when you sent me a page excerpt ages ago, just, a shot with your phone of this one. And you were like, check out how like dark and Fleming-esque this book is. And I'd never read the novelisation. So I was like, I just kind of thought it would be more or less what you got in the film. But after reading that, I was like, damn, there it is. It does feel quite dark and not what I expected. And then as I'm kind of reading through the opening chapters and stuff, I'm like, I feel like I'm going to look at this film in a completely different way after I've read this, because there's so much kind of backstory and you find out why he's in the log cabin with the lady at the beginning of The Spy Who Loved Me, and there's some key differences in there as well, which I think are really interesting. And yeah, I think anybody who hasn't read it before and goes through this book with us and then watches The Spy Who Loved Me after we've finished, I think is going to have a whole different level of appreciation for the film. Would you say there's any truth to that, Dan?
Oh, definitely. This is I haven't read all of John Gardner's books yet, but the 1 or 2 that I have read made me realize he's a very different writer to Fleming. He doesn't seem to be attempting to try and mimic his style in any way. He's just doing what he was doing. Yeah, it's a John Gardner book. It just happens to be about Bond. Whereas if you read Colonel Sun and you read the John Pearson autobiography, which was the next one, there's only 3 official Bond books that came out in the 70s. 2 of them were Christopher Wood novelizations, and the other one was the James Bond autobiography by James Bond a biography by John Pearson, who'd written Ian Fleming's biography. They are very much in the Fleming style. They copy and emulate that style very heavily. They're very influenced. Lots of colour, lots of descriptions, lots of snobbery about this kind of toothpaste.
Lots of breasts.
This one, yes, there's a lot of breasts in this book. So yeah, Fleming had this little quirk. Raymond Benson mentioned in his book about Bond, which was the Bedside Companion, that the feature that is most mentioned about the leading ladies in any book is not her eyes, it's not her hair, it's always her breasts. He'd get that in there once. He would always get one reference. This one, having read the first 3 yes, I mean, who can blame me, really? The first 3 chapters alone of this one, I think I sent a count. It's something like 7 breasts. It can't be 7, can it? It must be an even number. And
well, you could have just referred to one of them. It
may have just been 1 or 2. Yeah, There's a lot of nipplage. There's a lot of breasts.
Yeah.
And this, I think that is a hangover from his slightly naughty novels that he was writing. I think that's all it was.
Absolutely.
Confessions of the Window Cleaner and that sort of thing. There's probably a lot more flesh on display.
Absolutely.
In this book.
Indeed.
But what he's done very successfully in this book is that he has emulated Fleming's style absolutely perfectly. And it's very strange if you know and love this fairly, without putting it down, a fairly lightweight family entertainment PG-rated movie with lots of one-liners and lots of explosions and action and adventure. Hearing someone describe that plot, but in a very dark Fleming-esque tone, with lots of violence and lots of inner monologue in Bond's head, it's very strange. It's very, very strange indeed. You don't expect to hear an outrageous plot with submarines being swallowed by oil tankers and villains with metal teeth being described in such loving detail. It's very, very strange, but they don't clash at all. It's not two styles that don't clash. It works really, really well. I think it's a fantastic book.
So let me ask you this then. So going back to John Gardner briefly, when you know, I read them all when I was a kid, when I was younger, and I felt, from License Renewed immediately, I felt like he was writing something akin to a Roger Moore Bond film in book form, like in the way that the references made in the book, just the style of it felt like I was watching a Roger Moore Bond. And then when I'm reading this one, it's obviously quite a different, more Fleming-esque thing, like you say. Now, let me ask you this before we crack on and actually get into the reading the book itself. Who do you picture as Bond when you read this? Is it Roger or is it somebody else?
The person that I picture when I'm reading this book is the same person that I picture when I'm reading Ian Fleming, because he's grabbed that person, and that is the person that he's writing about. There's one or two lines where this Bond says something a little bit more flippant, but I think if you read Fleming enough, you can see that his agent becomes more flippant as the stories progress anyway.
Yeah.
Certainly by You Only Live Twice, he had this very dark sense of humour, which I think was Fleming taking grasp of his own mortality. He knew that he wasn't going to be around for much longer, I think, and that his dark sense of humour played into his writing. Yes, you can read that, and you can, if you didn't know that was not a Fleming novel, you might be quite surprised when you finally look at the front cover and find that it's written by someone else.
Right.
It does take elements of previous stories, certainly the certain descriptions he's pinched verbatim from other Fleming novels, but I see that as it's a homage. It's not him running out of ideas on the second chapter. That's him thinking, well, if I don't make these references, people are going to think I'm just copying his style. I'm actually doing it on purpose. That's my point.
I suppose doing something like this is a bit of a challenge, isn't it? Because as it is with anything new in the world of Bond, isn't it? Whether it's a film or a book or whatever, you can strike out and try and be as original as you can. But then for a lot of people, that would be, it's not Bond enough because it's too new. And then there's the going the other way as well, where people would say, okay, well, they're just trotting out the same old shit time and time again, and it's not, it's nothing new. And I feel like you have to tread that line carefully of like forging ahead with new material, but then at the same time making it familiar enough that it doesn't alienate everybody from what they know and love all these years.
But by writing the first sort of proper Bond book in about 10 years, he's sort of already got away with that, because he's carrying on something that the public hadn't had for 10 years essentially. So that there was no other style of doing it. It might as well have carried on doing it in the Fleming style, because that was the only style there was, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
There haven't been any other. Not really. I mean, Kingsley Amis carried on doing Fleming style, so it made sense for him to do it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So should we crack on with the Spy Who Loved Me, Dan? Should we open up the book and should we get cracking on the story?
We could, yes. I should point out that if I open up this book, a page falls out of it. I'm going to open it up, but very gingerly, because it's very old. It's starting to crumble.
Very nice. Good stuff. So I suppose we should point out that you're going to be kicking things off. You're going to read the first 3 chapters for us, and then we're going to have a little discussion, and then I'm going to read the following 3 chapters, and then we'll have a little discussion over that. So I guess what I would advise the JBR family to do as we go into this story is try and put the Spy Who Loved Me film to one side a little bit. And just kind of enjoy this for what it is. And obviously, when you hit certain scenes that you know from the film and they're portrayed in maybe a different way or whatever, just kind of take note of that, because that's some of the most interesting stuff. When you hit to certain scenes, you're like, oh, that's not quite how it goes down in the film. That's quite interesting that they chose to do that. And one of the other things that I like about it as well is the backstory that we just don't know about from the film. You just don't get it. So it's interesting to, I say, you find out what he was doing in the log cabin with the buxom lady in front of the fire and how he got there and stuff. So look out for stuff like that, because this is going to be quite an interesting journey for everybody. I think it's going to be quite cool. Yeah.
Films and books, novels, obviously 2 very different mediums. In a film, your attention span is drawn, it's probably shorter because you've only really got 2 hours, and then you need to go and have a wee.
Yeah.
You need to go and do something else. You need to move the car. Whereas with a book, you can pick it up, put it down. It can take you weeks to read.
Yeah.
So in a book, you can put in far more detail than you would normally in a film. In a film, you would condense all that, squash it down, chop out the stuff that wasn't necessary. What they've done here is the exact reverse of that. The film exists first, and then they've sort of expanded all of that. So certain scenes that happen for 5 seconds in the film, they take 2 or 3 paragraphs in a novel. Some of them, some of the chapters in this book are probably 60 seconds on the screen, and that's an entire chapter.
Yeah.
So they've taken the little nuggets that appear in the film and thought, I wonder what would happen if this was written in a more adult style, a much darker style. Where could we take this? And some of the stuff that they come up with is quite interesting and quite brutal and quite shocking in places.
Absolutely.
So look out for that. Look out for that.
All right.
But also, my voice is very monotonous. So if you're driving, it's probably not a good thing to be listening to this.
I suppose one of the challenges that we both had, because obviously we've pre-recorded the actual reading of the book, was doing the characters' voices. I had to find my Bond voice. I had to find my M voice. I had to find my sort of various characters' voices. My Stromberg voice, obviously. And I feel like it took me a little while to do it. I was sitting in my bedroom, just kind of like doing silly voices to myself until I was like, that one's manageable, I think. But I think you do very well. You do yourself a disservice, man. You have a beautiful speaking voice, and I think everybody's going to love it.
I have a piece of paper up there which says, bullet points. Open your mouth when you speak. That's rule number 1, because I have a tendency to swallow my words, and I shouldn't do that. Bullet point number 2 is speak slowly but quickly but clearly. Slowly but quickly but clearly.
Nice.
Yeah?
I like that. Yeah,
so
that's good.
It has to be in a way that people can understand, but you have to get it out fast enough, but it has to be clear. The third one is yo-yo your voice. So you have to go up and you have to go down. And you can't just do monotonous all the way through, because I tend to do that all the time. And the other one is hidden behind the computer. It says, stay on topic, Mr. Tangent.
Very nice. I like that.
That's a new one. That's a new one that I put that up for today, because I have a tendency to mine the tangents and fly off in that direction.
I feel like
my original route was.
I feel like Yo-Yo Your Voice could have been a cabaret singer in a Roger Moore era Bond film.
Yo-Yo Your Voice. Yeah. Sounds good, doesn't it?
Anyway, should we roll some theme tune and then crack on?
Yeah, I've always thought that the gun barrel needs to be at the beginning of the film, don't you? We should have done that by now. But yeah, crack on. Let's do it.
My name's Bond. James Bond.
Bond.
James.
Bond, what do you think you're doing?
Keeping the British end up, sir.
Welcome to James Bond Radio. News, reviews, and discussion of all things 007.
Pussy.
As you can see, I have no problem with female authority.
Oh, pipe down, 007.
Do you expect me to talk?
No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
James Bond, The Spy Who Loved Me, by Christopher Wood. Read by Dan Gale and Tom Sears. Chapter 1, Love in the Afternoon. The girl lay back against the pillow and looked out onto the balcony. The man was still leaning against the balustrade, his hands spread wide and his head tilted forward as he examined something that was happening on the beach. He was naked except for the light blue towel hitched around his waist. Although in repose, there was a quality of tension about him, like a baited trap. His body was not conspicuously muscled, but lean and hard. The girl knew that. She pulled the sheet up around her own naked body and willed the man to turn round. He did not move. She turned and looked at the man's watch beside the bed. It was a Rolex Oyster Perpetual. The slim antennae hands showed 4 o'clock. An afternoon when the heat still clung persistently, sulkily refusing to give way to the inevitability of evening. The girl dabbed her cheek with the sheet and changed her position against the pillow. She wanted him to come back to her, but she was a proud girl and she did not want to ask. Nothing that she could think of saying sounded anything more than an attempt to make conversation, and conversation was a way of asking. The girl looked down at the innocent swelling of her breasts beneath the sheet and blushed. Was it obvious? Could anybody tell at a glance that she'd been making love, wild, beautiful love? She pulled her fingers through her hair, trying to find out how tangled it was. There had been a Greta Garbo film about a queen who was trapped in a wayside inn with a man. He did not know that she was a queen, and as the snow separated them from the outside world, they had stayed in a room and made love. And the queen had wandered around the room, touching the now familiar objects and consigning them to her memory, for she would never come back to this room, and nothing with a man would ever be the same again. What in this room was to be stored away? It was a sad room, the furniture heavy and ill-matched as so often in hotels, and the lining of the tall curtains beginning to drift away at the seams. No paintings hung on the heavy wood panelling, and the carpet was an unlovely grey. A cry from the beach distracted her, and she looked out once more towards the man on the balcony. A shiver of wind, the first of the day, tugged at the curtains, and he turned and approached her. She gazed at the face as if seeing it for the first time. It was dark and clean-cut, and the eyes were set wide and level under straight, rather long black brows. The longish, straight nose ran down to a short upper lip, below which was a wide and finely drawn mouth. The eyes were hard, and the mouth was cruel. The line of the jaw was straight and firm. The girl felt herself becoming hot and moist and was ashamed, because she was not a promiscuous girl. She lowered her gaze. The man took her chin in his hand and forced it up so that he could look into her eyes. "You know that I'm going this evening. I have a job to do." She nodded. "You told me." Why was he telling her again? Was it his way of saying firmly that the pleasant interlude was over? Or was he, in a way, excusing himself, apologizing for making love to her and then leaving her? Whatever it was, she wanted him to kiss her and press her back into the pillows and hold her tight and make her forget everything except the marvellous feeling that had spilled over her the last time. The man leaned forward again. "You're probably the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." He looked into her eyes for several seconds and then abruptly kissed her with such passion that she expected to taste blood on her lips. His hard, blunt shoulders bore her down, and the sheet was contemptuously torn aside, like a leaf from a calendar. The girl closed her eyes. The jangle of the telephone was obscene. There were 3 lights in its base, red, yellow and green, and the red light was flashing. The man cursed, rolled to the edge of the bed and snatched up the receiver. The voice on the other end of the line sounded very far away and was difficult to pick out through the static. The girl watched the man's face as he talked, and her last hopes disappeared. Eventually he held the receiver over the rest, like a bomb waiting to be dropped. "A change of plan?" The man nodded glumly. "Apparently. You are to report to Moscow at once." The girl smiled a brief, sad smile of farewell, and then swung her long legs from the bed. "Tell them that I am leaving immediately, Sergei," she said. Chapter 2. Piste Dangereuse. James Bond was angry with himself. He had committed a number of elementary blunders which a man of his training and experience should not have committed. He'd been guilty of hubris and complacency. To put it in more direct terms, he'd been a damn fool. To start with, he should never have trusted the girl. Women you pick up in casinos are either straightforward whores or have run out of money playing some ridiculous system. Either way, they're going to be very expensive and probably very neurotic. Bond loved gambling because to him tension was a form of relaxation, but he should have been more wary of the lynx-eyed redhead spilling 500-franc plaques around his ankles and receiving his offer of a drink with an alacrity considerably less discreet than the scent she was wearing. Fracas by Piget. Anybody knowing that he was in town would have expected him to make an appearance at the casino and could have organised the assignation accordingly. Mea culpa. Bond was in Chamonix. M had suggested that he needed a few days' holiday and that the mountain air, a little skiing, a little walking, would do him good. In summer you have to go high to ski. Through the Mont Blanc tunnel and up the Italian side of the Monte Blanco. Somehow it did not feel to be the same mountain in Italian. Bond was not feeling charitable towards Italians. They had descended like a cloud of black corbeaux on the casino at Chamonix, wandering from table to table, casting plaques upon the water and making too much noise. In an attempt to parlay large numbers of inflated lira into deflated francs, they played everything badly and impeded Bond's concentration with their nudging badinage. The girl said she came to Chamonix every summer, though in winter she skied at Courchevel. Yes, the skiing at Tignes was excellent, but it was bleak, and there was too many Germans. The Germans were not sympathetique. She hoped Bond did not mind. Bond did not mind. The girl also had a friend who worked for Heliski. He would be able to lift them high into the mountains by helicopter where they could find the best snow conditions. There were huts with bunks up there. They could spend the night. It was when they were going up the face of the Aiguille de Mort that Bond first began to have doubts. The Aiguille de Mort drops sheer for 2,000 feet, and even in the severest winter conditions, never more than a thin powdering of snow clings to the shallow contours of its bleak granite physique. But it was not the physical danger that Bond feared. He was aware of the isolation towards which he was heading. Over the lip of the peak, and it was a lunar landscape clad in unending snow. The neat pattern of Chamonix disappearing below him was a child's toy town. Above his head, the rotor droned, and his breath froze against the reinforced perspex of the cabin. The wind was streaming the snow off the peaks like smoke, and the gyrofrance lurched in the treacherous air currents. Outside the cabin, the refracted image of the pilot peered back at him, as if projected against the cliff face. Butterfly wing mirror sunglasses slanted away beside the nose, a brutal smudge of a moustache. The man had hardly touched his hand when they greeted each other. It was as if Bond was something not to be touched, something that was to be moved quickly from one place to the other, and then dropped. The helicopter hit an air pocket and fell 10 feet. Bond felt his stomach tighten like a fist. He looked towards the girl. She looked tense, and he could see the whites of her knuckles as she gripped the pilot's frame-back seat.
Was it just the flight? When are we going to go down? Soon, darling. The snow will be good. Wait and see. Do I have an alternative? Thought Bond. He wished he could feel his Volta PPK 7.65mm nestling inside his trouser band, but like a damn fool he'd left it behind, hidden in the recesses of the hideous cuckoo clock that guarded the exterior of his room in the Hotel Dahoo. Bond tapped the glass of his Rod 88 goggles and examined the girl more closely. She had, he supposed, a typically French face, a dark, gypsy sluttishness tamed into sophistication. Her green eyes almost seldom seemed to be more than half open, and sheltered between a foliage of long, untidy lashes, which looked as if she had just washed them and found them impossible to manage. Her nose was short and tilted up at the end, and her lips thrust out, permanently pert and premeditated as if she was just about to blow a kiss. Her hair, now tucked up under her close-fitting knitted woolen cap, was cut casually to fall across her forehead and hang in inverted question marks above her shoulders. "Why do you bring this?" She pointed to the small red haversack that Bond had taken from his shoulders when he climbed into the gyrofrance. "It's my mountain survival kit." "There is everything we will need to survive in the hut. You will see." I was brought up never to take chances. Was it his imagination, or did the pilot's mouth tighten into a faint smile? Now they were all over the lip of the aiguille, and the turbulence ceased. Chamonix had disappeared, but at least he was spared that nerve-fraying view down the cliff face. "On va descendre tout de suite," said the pilot without turning his head. 2 minutes, he repeated, presumably for Bond's benefit, and jerked a thumb towards the snow. The helicopter skimmed over a ridge, and Bond looked down onto a wide, undulating expanse of snow broken by occasional rock formations. Far, far to his right was the line of squat telecabines, etched against the sky like a string of pack ponies, that made their way from the Aiguille du Midi to the Italian side of the frontier. To the far left of his vision must be the Swiss frontier, 3 countries interlocking into a vast white wilderness. It must be easy to move from one to the other if you knew the mountains. What country were they in now? The helicopter came down to hover above the snow, the blades whirring up a blizzard. The pilot said something to the girl which Bond did not catch because of the noise, and pushed back the hatch cover. The rush of cold air stung Bond's cheek. "I take it we're leaving here," shouted Bond. The girl nodded and gestured towards the settling snow. This was not deep powder, but layers of snow beaten down by successive falls. At this altitude, there were probably frequent snowfalls, even in the middle of summer. It was early enough in the day for the surface still to be frozen, and the helicopter skis had pressed out their shape to the depth of a couple of inches. Bond took a deep breath and felt his lungs protest. At 13,000 feet, the lack of oxygen can have a fit man wondering why he's suddenly breathing like a grampus. Bond kept a wary eye on the pilot, and indicated with a courteous extension of the hand that the girl should descend first. He did not want to step into the snow, receive a bullet in the stomach, and live just long enough to see the helicopter spiraling away into the sun. To his relief, the girl acknowledged the gesture with a smile and swung her legs out of the cabin. He dropped down behind her and removed her Rossignol ST competition skis from the outside of the gyrofrance. The pilot was looking back impatiently, as if eager to be off. "Is he picking us up?" "No, we will ski down." The girl took her skis and moved away from the helicopter. Bond pulled on his gloves, adjusted his goggles against the glare, and followed her. "Why are you looking at me?" said the girl. "I was just thinking how pretty you were," said Bond, examining the outline of her suit for any sign of a concealed weapon. The girl was called Martine Blanchot, and had said that she lived in Lyon, where her father owned a business. She had been unhappily married and stayed with friends when she came to Chamonix. Bond had never seen any of her friends. She was always alone when he had seen her at the casino. The helicopter sprayed up more snow and then slid away over the ridge. Bond felt a sense of challenge and excitement unrelated to his possible predicament. The mountains about him set the pulse racing. peaks sharpened as if with a knife falling behind each other in a march to a perfect eggshell blue sky, a view which embraced 3 countries and probably extended 100 miles. The vapour trail of an aeroplane cut a line through the sky, and hundreds of feet below, a hawk plucked at the wind with its wings, hovered, and then glided out of sight. "Do you not want to ski?" "I was looking at the mountains," said Bond. The girl rested her hand lightly on his shoulder, so that she could brush the snow from her boot. "When you see them all the time, you get used to them." Perhaps. Bond felt a sense of unreality. He'd been dropped onto the roof of the world, and he had done nothing to earn these spirit-enriching vistas, the reward of those who had bravely scaled the face of a mountain. Bond preferred his pleasures hard-won. He stamped hard into his skis, hunched his shoulders, and stabbed at the snow with his sticks. Some expiation was clearly necessary. "You have old-fashioned batons," said the girl. "You should get new ones. See how they curve around behind your back when you shoosh. There is less wind resistance." Bond looked at the girl's skis, which looked like alloy pig's tails. He shook his head. "They're not going to make any difference to my skiing. I'll stick to these, thanks." The girl shrugged and poked at one of her ski bindings. "Follow me. There are some crevasses here." Are there indeed, thought Bond. A man can lay for a long time in the bottom of a crevasse. He cursed himself again for his folly. The girl started to ski, carving out a zigzag pattern in the deep snow. She skied very upright, like most women, but she was graceful and had perfect balance. Bond watched her with grudging admiration. As a rule, he admired women practicing any sport as much as Dr. Johnson admired them preaching, but he made an exception in the case of fencing and skiing. These were 2 pursuits that could enhance their femininity rather than grotesquely diminish it. Bond tightened the clasp on his haversack and felt the steel frame bite into his shoulder blades. There was a touch of condensation in his goggles, and he pulled them away from his face a couple of times and adjusted the visor to clear the mist. The leather-buckled straps of his Kermer Zickrel sticks sat lightly on the top of his hands, and as a gust of wind cuffed snow into the air, so he shifted his weight and sent the 2-metre Rosignol STs sliding down the slope. As always, with any sport not constantly practised, there was a moment of doubt. Would the skill return when summoned? As he gathered speed and prepared for the first run, Bond told himself to relax. No one skis well when they are contacte. Ahead, the wide expanse of snow lay unbroken, save for the graceful tracery of the girl's track. Bond's skis rattled, and he moved them an extra inch apart before picking his spot with his stick. His body rose and he pressed down hard, carving the pattern of the turn with his knees. The skis hissed through the snow, and Bond felt himself secure in the perfect arc of movement that makes a good turn. He sank down and then rose again, effortlessly into the next. A glance behind him told that it was better than the first move, more crisply etched, and with less powder thrown out at the edge. Satisfied, Bond skied fast to where the girl was waiting. She looked at him admiringly. "You are a very good skier." There was a slight note of surprise in her voice. "I try," said Bond. They skied for another hour before they came to the chalet refuge. Bond had kept a careful watch, but had seen there was no sign of anyone else in the mountains apart from themselves. He had noticed chamois tracks, but that was all. Perhaps his instinct had been wrong for once. The helicopter pilot had been disgruntled because he was having problems with his wife or mistress, or both, and Martine Blanchot was like himself, merely looking for congenial company, and not part of some sinister plot. Maybe M's surmise that he was run down and needed a few days' holiday had been correct. M's surmises usually were. The hut was of typical alpine construction, wide and low, and backed into the mountain as if prepared to sell its life dearly against an avalanche that rolled down from above. The logs from which it was made crisscrossed and stuck out at 2 corners, and the tiny windows were sunk into the back walls like old man's eyes. 6 feet of snow on the roof gave it the appearance of some exotic gatto. Bond was glad to see that the snow around the door was undisturbed. He took off his skis and tried the door. At first he thought it was locked, but it was merely frozen. He put his shoulder against it and it gave with a sound like a pistol shot. Some snow fell on his head and the girl laughed. "Careful," said Bond. "I might put you across my knee." The girl raised an eyebrow and Bond wondered if she understood the exact meaning of the expression. She was very pretty, and the morning's skiing had rekindled a number of his appetites. Perhaps it had been the Italians and the losing streak at the casino that had made him liverish. As was his habit when playing roulette, Bond had borrowed his chef's card and studied the run of the ball since the sessions opened at 3 o'clock. He knew that mathematically it meant nothing, but it was his convention to take careful note of any peculiarities in the run of the wheel and to act upon them. In this instance, the card had told him nothing of interest except that 5 of the last 6 numbers to come up had been lower than 25. It was Bond's practice to play always with the wheel and only start on a new track when 0 came up. On this night he had decided to follow the wheel and back the first 2 dozen. The dozens pay odds of 2 to 1, which meant that for every 1,000 francs Bond bet, he would make a profit of 500 francs, provided that neither 0 nor a number higher than 24 came up. On the first throw, the ivory ball dropped onto the 25. The second throw was 32. Bond had made no sign, but merely marked his card. The third throw was another 25. Bond had stayed with the first dozens and increased his stake to the maximum. As he did every time, the croupier had picked up the ball with his right hand, given one of the 4 spokes of the wheel a controlled clockwise twist with the same hand, and flicked the ball around the outer rim of the wheel anti-clockwise against the spin. The ball had run smoothly at first, and then jiggled and joggled happily over the slots as the wheel began to lose momentum. Its carefree progress contrasted with the drawn faces around the table, some of them trying to keep pace with its movement like spectators at a tennis match. 0! Had there been a hint of triumph in that cry? Nobody had been on 0, and the table had been cleared in favour of the bank. So opened one of the least successful gaming sessions Bond had ever known. He had limped away from the tables with Martine Blanchot in exchange for a total loss of 8,000 francs. Perhaps now was the moment to discover if Mademoiselle Blanchot could provide adequate recompense for such a loss. Inside of the hut was sparsely furnished with a few solid wooden chairs and a hewn table. There was a large wood-framed fireplace with a fire laid and waiting to be lit, and a 2-tier bunk bed, each compartment being of strictly single dimensions. Particles of dust hung in the descending shaft of sunlight that penetrated one of the small, thick-paned windows, and there was a thick coating of dust on most surfaces. 2 tall doors flanked the fireplace and were presumably cupboards. "It needs a little money spent on it," said Bond. "It's kind of someone to leave us a fire." "Tu es du feu." Bond proffered his battered Ronson and enjoyed the line of the girls behind as she sat on her haunches to light the fire. Nobody has yet managed to design a ski outfit that enhances the work God put into the female body, but this concealed less than most. There was a crackle, a flame, a thin, determined column of smoke, and then the fire began to draw lustily. The girl rose to him triumphantly. "Voilà." "Do they have girl guides in France?" Again the look of puzzlement. "You mean on the mountains?" Bond took the girl in his arms and felt her warm, soft breasts against his chest. Soon he would kiss her and make the nipples hard. "No," he said. "I meant something completely different. Girl guides are—" He broke off, staring through the fragment of windows not obscured by drifts. He was looking at a perfect field of snow traversed by distant ski tracks, weaving down the side of the mountain. 3 pairs of ski tracks. Bond's heart raced. The tracks had not been there when they came. Somebody was coming towards the hut. Bond pushed the girl away and immediately saw fear in her eyes. She knew. What the hell was he going to do? Certainly not stay here. He looked into the frightened, betraying eyes and threw his arms roughly around the girl's waist. He snatched her to him so that the lips trembled an inch from his. "Might as well find out what you'd taste like." He kissed her hard and cruelly and hurled her back across the room so that she sprawled dangerously close to the fire she had just lit. Turning his back contemptuously, Bond stooped to gaze through the window. The path of the ski tracks was obscured by an outcrop of rock in the foreground. For 200 yards in front of him, there was no sign of movement. The men must have been in a hollow behind the rock. He could imagine them briskly sidestepping up the slope, the locomotive spurts of breath escaping from their lips. He turned towards the girl, who was still squatting in the fireplace, watching him waringly. "Get going." He had taken 2 steps towards the door when an impulse made him spin around and examine the 2 cupboards. The first yielded nothing of interest: 2 folded duvets, tins of cassoulet, and candles. The second was locked. Bond took his knee to it and then followed through with the whole weight of his foot encased in his Hansen ski boot. Splinters of wood burst from the area of the lock and the door crashed open. What Bond saw made him want to be sick. A pretty girl in a transparent laundry bag. Naked. Dead. Her hands tied behind her back. Her body mutilated. Disgusting smears of blood on the thick polythene. Her flesh bruised and swollen. Bond spun around towards Martine Blanchot. The expression of stupefied horror on her face saved her life. This was one turn of the wheel she did not know about. Bond clattered clumsily across the room and threw open the door. The midday sun had been strong enough to start the icicles dripping, and a ragged trench mark followed the line of the eaves. Bond snatched his skis, which were propped up against the wall, and threw them down into the snow. Damn, there was ice on one of his boots. He tried to force it into the binding and then hacked savagely with the tip of his stick. The black hard rime fell away parsimoniously as if being sculpted. The men must be near now. Bond scraped again and drove his foot down savagely. Click. It was not the sound of the bindings gripping, but of a carbine being cocked. Bond ducked instinctively, and the shot sprayed him with splinters of wood from the spot where his head had been. One ski was now secure, and Bond kicked the other forward and hopped after it so that he did not present a sitting target. He glided on one ski and, catching up with the second, brought his foot down until it made contact with the binding. A second bullet kicked up snow a couple of feet behind him. Bond felt the desperate electricity of fear circulating his body. If he could not get his boot into the binding... Bending forward with his weight agonizingly poised on his right knee, Bond steadied the errant ski and slid the toe of his boot under the expanded sea of metal that manipulated the front release mechanism. His heel wavered and then steadied momentarily between the sprung platform of the back restraint. He sucked in his breath and pressed down. The automatic stop resisted and then clicked down. The boot was held. Bond skate-skied behind a pile of logs buried by the snow and surveyed the open ground before him. There were 2 men on skis wearing white military-type one-piece suits with hoods. They were both armed with carbines, and one of the men was kneeling to take a better firing position. Even as he ducked back behind the logs, a bullet screamed into them, kicking up a flurry of snow. Bond jump-turned and headed for the slope, running at a reverse angle to the one by which he and the girl had reached the hut. He drove his skis against the snow as if they were ice skates and dropped to the shoes position as soon as he began to pick up speed. That way he made a smaller target and moved faster. There was a pause in which he could hear his heart beating, and then another shot that whistled over his right shoulder. He rose just long enough to turn and then took the steepest line. Within a second he knew he had made a mistake. The shot that sang off his boot buckles had come from below him. The first 2 men had been beaters, driving him towards the third. They must have realized that there was a good chance of them being seen approaching the hut, and had laid their plans accordingly. Once again, he, James Bond, had been found wanting. He was skiing into a trap. He could see the third man now, 50 yards below him and to the right. The man was holding a rifle but did not bother to take aim. He was waiting to see what Bond did, whether he stopped or came into closer range. Bond glanced behind him. There was no sign of the other men over the brow of the slope. Below, steep crags rose up on both sides, funneling him into a narrow, precipitous corridor. It was this that the third man was guarding. A cold sweat prickled Bond's armpits. "Think fast, damn you. You got yourself into this, now get yourself out. The soft life has caught up with you, Bond. The next comfortable plush-lined boîte you find yourself in will not be a boîte de nuit, but a boîte de la longue nuit, a coffin." Bond stopped in a flurry of snow and slid his right hand from beneath the restraining strap of his stick. Holding it freely and, like its fellow, away from his body, he skied slowly towards the man, trying to look as innocuous as possible. Immediately the man half raised his rifle and then lowered it. Clearly he was puzzled. Was Bond giving himself up? Should he shoot or should he wait? "Qu'est-ce qui se passe?" shouted Bond. "C'est une zone limitée?" He was 30 yards from the man and could make out his cold, hard, death's head features. The rifle swung up. The man had decided to kill. Bond raised the stick in his right hand in a gesture that must have seemed like admonishment. His fingers fumbled and twisted at the point where the Zickrel shaft met the grip. Something gave, and Bond could feel a pressure against the glove-clad pad of his thumb. The barrel of the machine carbine was on a direct line for his heart, and the man's shoulder hunched forward. Bond squeezed the metal nerve with a desperation born of fear. There was a violent yellow flash, and a pall of blood and guts was thrown 20 feet behind the man with a noise like a whip crack. Through the smoking end of his now pointless ski stick, Bond watched the rifle drop, the hands involuntarily fall to the obscene pumping hole, the look of unbelievable amazement on the face, the ghastly recognition, the 2 steps back taken in death, and the final collapse into the bloody shroud of snow. It was over in seconds, but Bond knew that that picture of that death would stay with him for the rest of his life. Another shot from behind, no better directed than the rest. Farewell to obsequies. Bond dropped to his now familiar crouch and skated for the corridor between the rocks. Sufficient momentum obtained, he dropped to the eggshell position and hugged his knees. Behind him, the eyes of the 2 men were not for their stricken comrade, but for the departing Bond. One of them quickly snapped into a firing position and spun around angrily as his comrade knocked aside the barrel of his rifle. The second man smiled and nodded towards the corridor. "Aiguille de mort." Bond was moving faster than he knew how to ski. The descent was precipitous and below him a sheer edge. His skis were flat against the snow and slapping like a motorboat travelling at high speed across a choppy sea. His heart was pounding and the mounting acceleration on his stone-like fall threatening to tear the goggles from his face. What was beyond the wide, leering mouth that stretched below him? In 5 seconds he would know, if he did not catch an edge and catapult himself against the jagged rocks that menaced the narrow corridor. He coiled himself like a spring and then... nothing. The snow disappeared from his feet, and he was launched into space. Thousands of feet below him, a crisscross of man-made lines. The town of Chamonix. He had skied off the edge of the Aiguille de Mort. Bond began to turn in the air like a rag doll dropped from a window. The force of descent ripped a ski from his boot, and he felt a sharp pain in his knee as it was twisted savagely by the motion. His widespread arms clawed at the air, trying to achieve some balance, but the world spun past. Granite, sky, snow. The wind screamed. It had been like this in dreams, the sudden jolt and the falling. But in dreams you woke up before you were spattered against the rocks like a bird's dropping. Bond fought to reach his right arm behind his left shoulder. The second ski had gone, and there was now some pattern to his descent. His fingers closed against the edge of the haversack and then lost contact. It seemed that he had been kicking in space for minutes. He clamped his hand to his shoulder and fumbled desperately. This time his fingers felt something, a semicircle of metal. He pulled and closed his eyes. Suddenly, something behind him crackled like machine gun fire, and there was a billowing glimpse of red, white, and blue. A giant hand seized him by the scruff of the neck and pulled the world into focus. His speed of descent slackened magically, and he could suddenly see his boots dangling below him. He had time to breathe, to look up at the bulging panels of silk above his head, to realize he was alive. In the town of Chamonix, an old man shaded his eyes against the sun and looked up into the mountains. A man had just parachuted off the edge of the Aiguille de Mort. He must be an Englishman because it was possible to see the reverse side of the Union Jack emblem on his parachute, and because only an Englishman would do that sort of thing. "Ils sont fous, les Anglais," he said, not without a trace of grudging admiration, and hurried on down the Avenue de Boucher. Nearly 9,000 feet above the town, Sergei Borzov of Smersh Odgel 2, the operations and executions branch of the murder apparat of the Russian KGB, lay with his mouth open and watching his blood melting a hole in the snow. It would not be melting it for much longer. Already a long shadow was falling across the slope, and the cold reached out ahead of it. He would never see her again. Or the hotel on the Black Sea, or the children playing on the beach, all that he had consigned to memory before turning and funneling his soul into her eyes. The room had been cool and dark and deep like a grave, the curtains stirring in a dying wind, the sheet above her breasts white as snow. White as snow. The black shadow passed over the man, and he closed his eyes and died. Chapter 3. Death to Spies. Anya Amasova felt uneasy as the nondescript ZAS saloon approached the familiar drabness of the Setrenska Ulitsa. Why did they give her such short notice? Why had no reasons been given? What had she done wrong? The last was the most persistent and worrying consideration. Nobody who worked for the KGB or any other branch of the Soviet bureaucracy could afford to believe that they were beyond blame. Original sin was as much a tenet of the communist faith as of the Christian. Perhaps they had found out about her affair with Sergei. She interrupted her train of thought to scold herself. Not affair, that was one of their words, cheap and shoddy. Transitory. She must find a better way to describe what had happened. Perhaps they had found out that she and Sergei had fallen in love. The room was almost certainly bugged, and there might even have been a concealed camera. Such things were not unknown. But could they object to her falling in love? Yes. They could object to anything. The state was your only lover, and the penalties for unfaithfulness were severe. "Accommodate, Major?" The driver had turned round and was looking at her with deadpan eyes. They had arrived. Number 13, Stratenska Ulitsa, headquarters of Smersh. Anya glanced up and caught a glimpse of her eyes in the driver's mirror. It is at such off-guard moments that you really see yourself, and Anya was disturbed by the look of fear in her eyes, the open, vulnerable wariness. Not for the first time, she wondered if she was cut out for the work the state had chosen for her. Perhaps her superiors at Odgel 4 had come to the same conclusion. Smersh is a contraction of Smert Spionum, which means death to spies. The organization currently employs a total of 60,000 men, women, and transvestites, although the number changes continuously as a result of the operational losses and the elimination of weak and unreliable elements. Anya Amasova's progress within Odgel 4 of Smersh, the section responsible for international security in the armed forces, had been steady rather than spectacular. She had been the youngest of 4 children born to the wife of a country doctor. With his death in a car accident, Anya's mother had been grateful for the suggestion from the headmistress of the local school that Anya was a bright girl who might qualify for training at a special technical college near Leningrad. Anya had passed the examination with flying colours, and was soon attending classes in general political knowledge and tactics, agitation and propaganda. In her third year she moved on to technical subjects and became proficient in the use of codes and ciphers. She was marked satisfactory in communications and became conversant with the intricacies of contacts, cutouts, couriers and postboxes. Her field work was also deemed satisfactory. In tests she received high marks for vigilance, presence of mind, courage and coolness. Her mark for discretion was average. After Leningrad came the School for Terror and Diversion at Kuniko outside Moscow. Anya's marks in judo and athletics were high, and she became a capable wireless operator and excellent photographer. She also had her first lover, her small arms instructor, who was runner-up in the Soviet Rifle Championships. Anya became an excellent pistol shot. Up to now, all her training had been in the Soviet Union, but with the termination of her course at STD, she was sent to work at an avonpost in Czechoslovakia. These mobile operation groups were engaged in surveying and, when necessary, liquidating Russian spies and party workers in the satellite countries. Anya's work in this sector had been beyond reproach, although it was noted on her zapiska that she had always delegated the act of execution. Upon recall to Moscow, Anya had been given the rank of major and assigned to military records, where she was granted access to the files of all military personnel below the rank of general or equivalent. In conjunction with the other departments of Smersh, she was responsible for the vital character assessment that preceded any promotion or demotion. She had written copious and highly detailed reports, and as a result of her conscientiousness, although she was unaware of it, 3 men and a woman had been hanged with fine wire, a death for traitors that Stalin had borrowed from Hitler. The bizarre course from which she had just been summoned was one that united several branches of the ever-expanding octopus of Smersh, and it was here that she had met Sergei Borzov for the first time. He had been reticent about his role in the organization, as had she. It was never wise to talk too much, and dangerous to ask questions. One of the 2 sentries outside number 13 bent down to open the door of the car, and his submachine gun banged against it clumsily. The driver began to protest about his paintwork, and then stopped abruptly when the sentry looked at him. Anybody involved with Smersh was to be feared. Anya left the car and walked up the broad flights of the steps leading to the big iron double door. She continued to feel uneasy. At first glance, the large olive-green room on the second floor could have been mistaken for a government office anywhere in the world. The floor was fitted with finest quality carpet, and the large oak desk dominated one end of the room. 2 spacious windows gave onto the courtyard at the back of the building, and were fringed by heavy brocade curtains. On one wall was a large portrait of Brezhnev, surrounded by a thin border of faded wallpaper, which indicated where an even larger portrait of Stalin had once hung. On the desk were 2 wireframe baskets marked in and out, a heavy glass ashtray, a carafe of water and tumblers, and 4 telephones. One of the telephones was marked in white with letters VCH. These letters stood for Vysoké Chastota, or high frequency. Only 50 supreme officials were connected to the VCH switchboard, and all were ministers of state or heads of select departments. It was served by a small exchange in the Kremlin operated by professional security officers. They could not overhear conversations on it, but every word spoken over its lines was automatically recorded. It was this telephone that had summoned Major Anya Amasova. "Oh, come in, Major Amasova. Come and sit down." The warmth in the man's voice surprised Anya. She had only met him on 3 occasions when answering questions about reports she had submitted. Colonel General Nikitin, the head of Smersh, was standing behind his desk and extending a hand towards a straight-backed red leather chair. He was a tall man, dressed in a crisply pressed khaki tunic with a high collar, and dark blue cavalry trousers with 2 thin red stripes down the side. The trousers disappeared into riding boots of black, highly polished leather. On the breast of the tunic were 3 rows of medal ribbons, 2 orders of Lenin, Order of Alexander Nevsky, Order of the Red Banner, 2 orders of the Red Star, the 20 years service medal, and a ribbon that Anya did not recognize. It must belong to the newly struck Sino-Soviet Friendship Medal. Anya remembered the colors so that she could look it up when she got back to military records. Above the row of ribbons hung the gold star of a hero of the Soviet Union. I apologize for my late appearance, Comrade General. You heard of the technical problems with the Ilyushin. Nikitin held up a peremptory hand that told her that her question was unnecessary. I was informed. He paused and looked hard into her face. How was the course? Anya was thrown by the suddenness of the question. It redoubled her fears that she had been summoned because of her relationship with Sergei. She could feel herself blushing. For the first time she wondered if his mission might have been engineered to separate them. Very interesting, Comrade General. Very interesting? General Nikitin smiled. His face was rough and calloused, like a potato left to dry in the sun, but his eyes could have been prized from a week-old corpse. There was no visible sign of life behind them. Anya felt her blush deepen. It was a most unusual and unexpected assignment, which you took the fullest advantage of. Somewhere in a distant corner of the room, a blue bottle was beating against a window pane. A furious high-pitched buzz, and then silence for 10 seconds. Then the buzzing started again. Nikitin was still probing with his cold, lustreless eyes. The scope of the course came as a surprise to me. This was, if anything, an understatement. The movement order assigning her to the dacha on the southeastern coast of the Crimea had confided itself to the words Cold War techniques. It had come as considerably more than a surprise on the first morning of the course, in the company of 20 attractive young men and women, to be confronted by a folder with "Sex as a Weapon" printed in bold letters on its shiny cover. What followed had been a revelation. Lectures, films, demonstrations, what was discreetly described as controlled participation with electrodes attached to various parts of the body to measure the degree of response. Tests, more measurements, interviews, instructions in the latest cosmetics available in the West and how to apply them, a course in haute couture. Military records had suddenly seemed like a different world. Anya's final rating had been E-sensual, which she knew meant she made love well and enjoyed it. Despite every laboratory test that the scientists could devise, her emotional stability had remained an unknown quantity. The private report, which she did not see, said that she had exceptional potential, but with an element of risk attached to it. And in the middle of all this, she had fallen in love. It must have been that to which Colonel General Nikitin had been referring with his talk of taking the fullest advantage. Suddenly she felt a rush of anger. What right did they have to tell her who she could love or not? Was she to be punished because among all the guile and artifice, the antiseptic passion and the throbbing wires, she had found something that could never be contained in any tawdry manual of eroticism? She stared back into Nikitin's soulless eyes with a new determination. The Colonel General nodded as if in agreement with some sentiment that needed no expression. He was a fine young man, one of our best operatives. He studied her wondering face. Your, a slight pause, relationship could not escape notice. Anya felt alarmed. What did he mean, was? And up to now, conspicuously efficient. It just shows how these affairs of the heart can affect people. What do you mean? Anya saw the pinpoint of red behind the eyes and corrected herself. What do you mean, Comrade General? Nikitin reached into a drawer and produced a small rectangular scrap of paper. A light was extinguished before he opened his mouth. "I very much regret to inform you that Comrade Sergei Borzov was killed on active service behind enemy lines. I have just heard the news." He listened to the girl's short intake of breath, then dropped his hand to switch off the tape recorder below the desk. With unusual haste, the general levered himself from his chair and circumvented the desk. "You must not blame yourself too much, my dear. Others might read more into the whole business than it warrants, but you can rely on me to keep an open mind. If Sergei's judgment was at fault, it was not because of you, because of your affair." The general seemed pleased at having found the word. "You are young and very beautiful, and you have need of guidance, of protection. You need a friend who is well placed, especially at the moment." The rough hand dropped to her knee like a paw. "Where did he die?" "In the French Alps. He was on a mission to eliminate the British agent. He failed." Anya felt her nostrils twitch before the scent of roses that some Russian men wear to disguise the fact that they cannot be bothered to wash. Nikitin's head was bending towards her lap, and she saw that the crimped line across his forehead denoted a wig. An obscene dribble of rust-coloured adhesive leaked from beneath that hairline. Anya fought a desire to be sick. Her skirt was now pressed back against her waist, and the animal hand... She rose to her feet and thrust Nikitin aside as she launched herself at the desk. She pressed a finger to her lips and snatched up a thin, state-issued ballpoint. Nikitin watched, like an animal ready to spring. The record of Sergei's death still lay on the desk, and Anya turned it over and wrote urgently. This had to work. She had seen Nikitin's hand drop below the desk, and she knew what it meant. She finished her message and thrust it into Nikitin's wary hand. He looked at her with slow-burning hate, and raised it to his eyes. "Most honored, but I know from military records that there is another microphone hidden in your room." Nikitin raised his eyes from the message, and for a second let them rest on the ceiling. Then he slowly made his way back round the table. He lowered himself into his chair, and a slight subsidence of the right shoulder revealed that a hand had been dropped. The eyes that looked towards Anya were as devoid of expression as the face of the moon. "But I did not bring you here to discuss the unfortunate death of Comrade Borzov. There is an assignment of great importance for which I think you may be suited."
Okay, excellent stuff. I thoroughly enjoyed listening to that. Beautiful, beautiful speaking voice there, Dan. Excellent performance, excellent sound effects. You did a bang-up job, man. I'm really impressed with that.
It was good. There was not enough of me in it, though.
No, absolutely
Needed
not.
a touch more of me. Well, I had fun reading it, and that's all that matters.
Absolutely.
My two favorite, my favorite audiobook narrator is David Rintoul, and his Bond is the one that I'm channeling when I'm reading Bond's lines.
Very nice.
Yeah.
All right, good stuff. So, talk to me then. So that was obviously the first 3 chapters of The Spy Love Me. Now, starting off, we've got chapter 1. It's a very short chapter. We've got the little sort of little bit of post-coital chit-chat between Triple X and her lover, who obviously Bond's about to kill in the next chapter. So how do you feel about that, man? I feel like that was sort of more or less what we got in the film, wasn't it? There, it was out of sequence. I think it makes for a better novel to play slightly with the reader's expectations. You know how in the film you assume that the character that's being referred to on the radio, Agent Triple X, is the guy. Yeah. You just assume
because it's a Bond film. This is probably a Bond-like clone. And at the last minute, it's Anya that actually answers the call, and you go, well, that's interesting. It's that, but because we can't see the people in the book, we assume that it's Bond that the author is describing.
Yeah, especially with the mention of the watch and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, dark hair, tall, lean, cruel mouth, cold eyes, all that sort of stuff. We assume that it's Bond that he's talking about. So the rug is pulled out from under our feet, but not in the same way that it's pulled out in the film. Although that is there too, it's still Anya that answers the call, not the guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's quite interesting.
Absolutely, good stuff. So yeah, I'd almost call that a prologue. That chapter, it's just a little kind of intro to the book before things start. Now, where things get very interesting is in chapter 2, obviously, because obviously when we see Bond at the beginning of the film, he's cozying up to a lady in a log cabin, and he gets the ticker tape watch message from M that he's got to report. And he goes on his skis. Bit of Bond 77 in the background, ski chase, off the mountain, Union Jack parachute, bosh, job done. Whereas we get a lot more detail this time around, don't we? We get Piste Dangereuse, chapter 2, and we find out the whole lead up to that moment, as well as kind of what we actually see on screen as well. So so basically, Bond's there in a casino, and he picks up a lady in the casino. They end up going up into the mountains to have a little ski, and then we have it. So first of all, do we know what Bond was doing in the casino? Is he on holiday? What's he doing? What's the deal?
I think it's suggested that M has told Bond to go and have some time off. In the films, it always seems to be 2 weeks leave, doesn't it? Whenever there's some sort of cock up, it's you can take 2 weeks leave. That's like, get out and let things cool down and come back when you've got your head together. Yeah. It seems to have been M's suggestion you should just try go on holiday, get some skiing done.
Yeah.
But he should know by now. He can't send Bond off on holiday and not have him come back having caused some... when he did it in Mexico, he was at Day of the Dead and he just blew up a building. You can't just go on holiday. You can't send him on holiday and expect him to come back without having caused some international scandal.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's M's fault, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's supposed to be on holiday.
Yeah. So he's obviously picked up a lady in the casino. She's invited him up into the hills into the mountains to go skiing, and he's gone. They get into a helicopter together and off they go. But it's interesting. Now, the thing that as soon as you read the beginning of chapter 2, you're like, oh, this is not the film, in the sense that just the language being used. Like, obviously the first part of the chapter, he's like, James Bond was angry with himself. He committed a number of elementary blunders which a man of his training and experience should not have committed. And then it goes on to say, to start with, he should never have trusted the girl. Women you pick up in casinos are either straightforward whores or have run out of money playing some ridiculous system. And it's like, ooh, that's kind of, this is not the Roger Moore Spy Who Loved Me. This is a different Bond, isn't it? Right out of the gate, right there.
No, I had to swallow my own words trying to read that sentence in a convincing way, because I don't believe that myself. I've met some very nice people in casinos, and only a couple of them were whores. It turns out it's quite surprising that some women are quite nice. Yes, I think that's Christopher Wood channeling Ian Fleming. That's him assuming that that's what Fleming would have written. I don't think that's Christopher Wood saying that. I don't think that's certainly not Roger Moore saying that. It might be Bond saying that through Ian Fleming. I'm guessing a lot of what Bond said was actually Ian Fleming's own opinions. I don't know how much of that was actually him writing a character.
Yeah.
I think he was quite good at putting his own flavours and likes and dislikes into his novels and through his characters.
Well, I tell you what it made me think of is in the Living Daylights book, just going back to that briefly, there's basically Bond has to stake out this, it's basically the defection scene with Koskov in the film. He's basically got to stake out this position for 3 days across the street, waiting for the defection to happen. First 2 nights it doesn't happen. The third night it obviously does. And then he's basically on the days where it hasn't happened or where it's too early before it's due to happen, he's kind of working out what he should do for the day. And he was like, I'll either go and get some rest, or he was going to go and visit a local brothel. And it's kind of like, ooh, that's something you just, the film Bond just doesn't ever enter that kind of world, and I feel like just that comment is kind of like a toe into the water of that darker side of Fleming's Bond, I think.
Yeah, very different time. I don't know whether or not that's ever been hinted at in the films. I mean, it seems to be that Bond he doesn't need to do that. They've sort of, the films have always suggested that should those thoughts ever enter his head, there's always some far nicer alternative, just hanging around in the background anyway.
Yeah.
So, but although if you remember the very first, it was one of the short stories in For Your Eyes Only that suggested that Bond became a man in a brothel somewhere in France.
That's right, isn't it? I think it was like you were supposed to be 16 in a Parisian brothel or something is where he lost his virginity. So yeah, and his wallet. That's right. Good memory. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah.
The near simultaneous loss of his virginity and his notebook. That was how they put it.
Excellent stuff. So how do you feel about this then? Obviously, he's at a casino, which is a typical kind of Bond thing to do. Picks up a lady, takes him up into the mountains for a bit of a ski, and obviously gets kind of lured into a trap that he's kind of half suspected throughout the whole thing. How do you feel about how this plays out? Because this is the interesting meat. I think the two interesting things about doing this is, one, the scenes that we don't get in the film, and this is obviously one of them, and then the scenes that we do get in the film, but done in a slightly different way. So I feel like as soon as the ski chase starts, we're in kind of more or less film territory, but up until that point is something that's completely new material. So how do you feel about that sequence?
It's very interesting to see it given a reason to be there, given an excuse. I think in the film, it's there because it looks good and it's exciting. And, wouldn't it be great if we started this film off with him skiing off a mountain? Why would he do that? Well, why not? It looks great. We had this, there was supposed to have been an advert that Cubby had seen in a magazine in which Rick Sylvester was skiing off a mountain and parachuting for some alcohol. Can't remember what the advert was for, but it was inspired by that. And although the film gives a very watered down explanation as to what he's doing up there, and a reason for him going skiing, it's never explained why he's got a parachute with him. You don't question that. You just think, well, it looked great. It was exciting. It's fine. Whereas the book has to go into far more detail, and it has to explain what he's doing up there, why he's got a parachute with him, all this sort of stuff, and it has to do it in a convincing way, and I think it does.
Yeah,
I think it does.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You're right. It will make you look at the film in a different way. If you assume that he's gone up there because he had a load of bad luck at a casino, and he thought, my luck's got to change. I'll go off with this lady and we'll see what happens. But I'm not that much of an idiot that I'm going to leave my only chance of escape behind. I'm going to take it with me.
I see. What's interesting as well, obviously, he's up there. There's no ticker tape watch this time. There's no, M come and report back to HQ immediately stuff. He's got there. He's been suspicious the whole way up. Then he notices the ski tracks in the snow through the window. He knows something's up, and then obviously it all kicks off. So that's interesting. That it's more of an escape rather than anything else. It's just it's not a mission that obviously he's just randomly kind of left to go on his mission, and then obviously there's some bad guys just randomly waiting for him. It's a plot to get him kind of thing, which is quite interesting. Now, a couple of other little passages that I thought were quite interesting and exemplifies the sort of Fleming side of things is basically as soon as he twigs the ski tracks and he knows that it's on, basically, it says, this is page 31. Bond pushed the girl away and immediately saw fear in her eyes. She knew. What the hell was he going to do? Certainly not stay here. He looked into the frightened, betraying eyes and threw his arm around the girl's waist. He snatched her to him so that her lips trembled an inch from his. Might as well find out what you taste like. He kissed her hard and cruelly and hurled her back across the room so she sprawled dangerously close to the fire she had just lit. And I feel like, what do you think that is? Is that something the film Bond would have done? Is that pure Fleming, or is it something else?
I think people who don't like the film Bond would assume that's the sort of thing he'd do. I don't think he's ever really gone quite that far, and I don't think he ever would. No, this is book Bond. This is Fleming Bond. This is... that's a pretty misogynist thing to do, but that's him, I think, channeling Fleming again and thinking this is what the character would do. If I'm going to write this in Fleming style, I might as well
have a little taste and then throw her.
Do it 100%.
And then literally just throw her across the room.
Yeah. Don't ever do that. Never try that. It's just the repercussions. You never hear the end.
Absolutely, yeah, indeed. And then there's one other part as well that basically when he opens the cupboard, the wardrobe there, and sees the dead body of the girl inside. And then it says, Bond spun around towards Martine Blanchot. The expression of stupefied horror on her face saved her life. This was one turn of the wheel she did not know about. So that tells you Bond was ready to just basically shoot her in the face and call it a day until that happened, and he realised that obviously, okay, she's not quite as bad as he perhaps thought before. So I think already this is the first chapter you meet Bond, and already you're getting that dark Bond 100% off the page there.
I don't want to jump ahead because I can't remember exactly which chapter all this was said in, but it is suggested that this is a setup. Well, it's more than suggested that this is a setup along the lines of From Russia with Love, where the KGB have decided that they're going to try and not just kill Bond, but frame him, embarrass him into just disappearing, or kill him first, but besmirch his entire character and record, so that people always remember him as being this person, this blackmailer, this womanizer. Well, he is a womanizer, but they're trying to embarrass him before they kill him in From Russia with Love, and they're trying to do the same sort of thing here.
Absolutely.
And again, that's another way of Christopher Wood saying that worked really well in that other novel. We might as well pinch that idea and use that for what we're doing.
That's
here.
beautifully done. And again, if I remember correctly, in the film, with Triple X in bed with Sergei, it's her getting the message to report, and then she goes and reports, and it's not him getting any kind of message. Am I right in thinking that?
That's how it is in the film, yeah.
Whereas this time, in the book, obviously, he's basically telling her at the very beginning that he has to leave tonight, and that he's got a job to do, basically. And then obviously she gets a call that she has to report as well. So obviously he's having his little sort of fumble with Triple X before he goes on his job, which is obviously to go and take out Bond. Like, that's obviously all been pre-planned, and that it's a nice idea that he's obviously taken that scene out of sequence and stuck it right at the beginning, because it is the preamble to the actual thing. It's quite a nice touch, that I thought.
And it's an important part of both the film and this book that it's highlighted that Bond has murdered someone that Anya was in love with. And how is that going to affect the rest of the story? They set up a very simple plot at the beginning, and they stick to it. And I think people appreciate, idiots like me appreciate scripts and stories that only have basic storylines. Don't want it too complicated.
Yeah, no, I think there's a beauty in that, isn't there? It's kind of, when you compare the original Star Wars to the Phantom Menace. I think that's a good example of a relatively simple plot versus one that's just tied up in details and crap that you don't need. So yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So chapter 3 then, Death to Spies. Very Cold War, very, very Fleming-y title. And we've basically got, this very much reminded me of the From Russia with Love book, actually. This is obviously Anya going into the office. And there's no Gogol this time. This is a different comrade, what is he, a comrade general?
Yeah, it's interesting that they... it's been a long time since I've read From Russia with Love, but I remember the character that's in that. He's a very revolting character. I thought he would have been in this one, but they've replaced him with a character called Nikitin. I don't believe Nikitin has come from Fleming. I don't think he has.
No, I don't recall that name cropping up before, but it's a very similar kind of setting, isn't it? Where, you know, you've got the office of the KGB and stuff, and number 13 Stratenta Ulitza and all that kind of stuff.
It seems odd, though, that they would create one new character for the book and then another new character for the film. Why it isn't Gogol in this book or Nikitin in the film, I don't really know, because it's the same person writing both characters. Seems a bit odd.
I feel like
there it is.
there's a couple of interesting name choices. The main one we will tackle when we get to the next section of the book. But that's funny when that happens. Where
I will tackle. I think you'll find I have to read that name out. It's not you.
Fair enough.
It's the luck of the draw. I got the complicated ones with all the French and Russian, and Tom gets all the interesting bits.
Absolutely. So basically this is just Anya going into the office. Obviously in our minds we've got the scene with Anya and Gogol together in that massive dark stony office with just one chair over in the corner, and it's basically the equivalent of that, though it takes a kind of a darker turn this time, where Nikitin is obviously kind of trying to crack onto her a little bit and get stuck into Triple X in more ways than one. So how do you feel this chapter does? Obviously you get a lot of backstory for Triple X and a lot of stuff about the KGB and the Death to Spies and all that kind of stuff in this chapter. There's a lot of exposition to get through.
There is, none of which is in the film really, but again, the film doesn't need it. It's interesting that this plays out like From Russia with Love, where Rosa Klebb is seemingly trying to get into Tatiana Romanova's pants. At least in the film, it's more than suggested in the film. And this character Nikitin is trying to Harvey Weinstein his way into Anya's life. And he's made out to be quite a grotesque character. There's the whole backstory, the whole sort of side element that you don't get in the film, where he is recording everything secretly. Because she's so well trained, she knows that not only is he bugging his own room, but there's more than one microphone. So even if it looks like he's turned one of them off, there's still another one recording. She doesn't want to get the sack, so she's quite happy to push him aside, but rather than read out, "You horrible, disgusting man, keep your hands off me," which the tape recorder will pick up, she just writes it down on a piece of paper. "Thank you very much, not interested. I know about the other microphone." She just, holds it up. So that's quite interesting. None of that's in the film. But it works quite well in the book, I think.
Me too. I quite like the scene. You're right. It's kind of like the scene with Rosa Klebb again. And there's in the book, obviously, there's that scene where Klebb goes to the bathroom, comes out dressed in like negligee and stuff, and she's got makeup all plastered all over her face. I remember the line Fleming uses something like, "She looked like the oldest and ugliest whore in the entire world," or something, and then Tatiana freaks out and runs away. And it's kind of like, it's almost like he's a male kind of Klebb type character, obviously without the negligee this time, but you wouldn't be surprised if he was into that as well. But obviously he tells her that Sergei's dead. So it's very similar to the Gogol scene in that regard.
I like the fact that he is described normally the rightly or wrongly, a lot of characters in Fleming's books have got disfigurements or something about them that is somehow you're supposed to dislike them more because they have something about them that isn't considered normal.
They're not British. They're not your kind of typical old school sort of straight down the line white man.
Yeah.
They've either got like some facial discrepancy or something that's just not just out of the box a little bit, and that's supposed to be as an indicator of villainy, I think.
Yeah, and some characters have got one leg longer than the other, or a hunched back or something, and one or two of them might even be homosexual. Can you imagine? In this case, they've tried to make Nikitin look like a horrible old man because he's wearing a wig, which is just obscene. Can you imagine somebody wearing a wig? It's that and the fact that he's being very lecherous.
Yeah.
But that's like at the worst possible moment, she looks up and notices that he's wearing a wig. And that's like, oh my God, just get your hands off me, you horrible wig-wearing man. But that's quite interesting. I like the fact that they just being a lech is and being a foreign lech is not bad enough. He's got to have a hairpiece. He's got to
have a little wig on as well, just to make it extra potent. But, there we go then. So to summarise then, so far we've had chapter 1, we've had the Sergei and Triple X canoodling and then being called away onto their missions. Chapter 2, we've had Bond, the story of him getting to the wood, the log cabin, and obviously escaping, skiing off the mountain, and obviously escaping there. And then chapter 3 being the visit to the KGB for Anya, bit of backstory, bit of KGB stuff going on, and what in the film is the Gogol scene. So should we crack on and do the next 3 chapters?
Yes, we should, because I'm getting tired of talking and we need to hear you doing some talking.
Absolutely, right, let's do it. Chapter 4, Hunt the Submarine. August had committed an act of treachery against the English summer, and rain was lashing the windows of M's office overlooking Regent's Park. The old man was having trouble with his pipe as usual. Bond let him get on with it and gazed around at the familiar fittings he had come to know so well over the years. The Venetian blinds that gave an impression of coolness even on the hottest day, the dark green Wilton carpet leading to the big red leather-topped desk, the twin-bladed tropical fan, now immobile, set in the ceiling above M's desk. The head of Britain's Secret Service had lost no time in summoning Bond to his office. No sooner had Station J contacted him at Chamonix and told him that his presence was urgently required at headquarters than he had screamed down the motorway to Geneva and caught the first plane to London. And no sooner was he behind his desk staring glumly at the pile of routine signals and reports marked "For your urgent attention" that always arrived in droves when he left the country than the telephone had rung. 007. Can you come up? It was the Chief of Staff. M? Yes. What's it all about? I don't know, but it's serious. It always is, thought Bond as he put down the receiver. He left his office and took the lift up to the top floor. The walk down the long, quiet corridor was familiar, and he knew exactly how many paces it would take. 30 before he came to the outer door of M's office. The girl behind the desk was unfamiliar and unbeautiful, so the smile that Bond bestowed upon her was dutiful rather than anticipatory. She bent forward and pressed the switch of the intercom. 007 is here, sir. Send him in, said the metallic voice, and the red light, which meant on no account must I be disturbed, glowed above the door. That had been 10 minutes ago, and Bond was still listening to the rasping and sucking noises. At last they stopped, and M dropped the still smoking husk of a match in the big copper ashtray. So you found Q's gadgets useful, did you, James? Very efficacious, sir. I thought you were going to fire them into the side of mountains, that sort of thing. That was my intention, sir. M attacked his pipe with a small pick and turned away to billow clouds of smoke towards the ceiling. There was a dry twinkle in his eye as he turned back towards Bond. Q will be very impressed when you submit your report. I don't think he had any idea you were going to be so zealous in your testing of his new toys. It came as a surprise to me, sir. M looked at Bond, not without affection. While we're on the subject, we had a signal from the French DST. What are they going to do? Nothing. M registered the sharp rise of Bond's right eyebrow and continued. They're leaving the matter in the hands of the local gendarmerie. A chalet fire of this description is not uncommon. Bond was now sitting forward in his chair. Perhaps she did not notice that there was petrol stored by the hut for the snowcats. The young people must have tried to start a fire and, well, you know how dangerous it can be with petrol. A man and a girl, Bond nodded. A sensible way for them to have covered their traces. The man he had shot and the girl in the cupboard consigned to flames. There appear to have been 2 women and 1 man, said M. The bodies burned almost beyond recognition. Any identification will have to wait for the next of kin to come forward. Which could take a long, long time, thought Bond. So, Martine Blanchot, or whatever her real name was, had paid the ultimate price for incompetence. There was only one organisation capable of that combination of brutality, guile and casual disregard for human life. Bond decided to express his feelings to M. I think it was Smersh, sir. They were after me, but like last time they wanted to make me stink even before I was rotting in my coffin. There was a dead girl in the hut, some drugged little tart from the back streets of Lyon most probably. They'd hacked her up like shark bait. And you were the shark, M nodded grimly. He could see the newspaper headlines. Drug-crazed British agent slays in mountain love nest. The Home Secretary on the telephone, the official denials, the snide remarks from the fellow travellers in the House of Commons, the satisfied smiles around the table of the High Presidium in the Kremlin. Yes, once again 007 had been fortunate. Was it Napoleon who had always supported one of his marshals because he was lucky? Strange that this should happen now, James. Bond looked at M inquiringly and reached for the flat, light gunmetal case containing 50 Balkan and Turkish mixture cigarettes specially made for him by Morlands of Grosvenor Street. He extracted one and ran a finger over the triple gold band before placing it between his lips. What's up, sir? M's tranquil lined sailor's face suddenly became tense. What does HMS Ranger mean to you, James? Bond flicked through the card index in his mind. One of our Resolution-class nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, sir. M's approving silence told him to continue. Laid down by Vickers Armstrong at Barrow-in-Furness in 1967, operational in 1971, length approximately 370 feet, beam 33 feet, surface displacement 7,500 tons, submerged 8,400, speed reputed to be 20 knots on the surface and 25 submerged, although the submerged figure may be on the slow side. Ship's complement 151 men, 16 officers and 135 ratings. They operate on a 2-crew basis to get maximum time at sea. Bond broke off and put the battered, oxidized Ronson to work on his cigarette. M's demanding eyes bored into him as he directed a thin stream of smoke towards the ceiling. And the armament? 6 conventional 533mm torpedo homing tubes placed forward and 16 Polaris surface-to-surface intercontinental missiles with a range in excess of 2,500 miles. M continued to stare levelly. Bond noticed that his pipe had gone out. HMS Ranger has disappeared. The rain persisted in its attack on the windows, and for long seconds its angry patter was the only sound heard in the cool, dark room. You mean there's been an accident? M shook his head. We don't know. Radio contact is intermittent. The Admiralty first became alarmed when there was no sitrep from the last reporting point. They sail on a predetermined course? Yes. So that if something had gone wrong and wireless communication had failed, they could be lying on the bottom anywhere over a distance of, say, 2,000 miles. Correct. So why is the department involved, thought Bond? We have no expertise in raising nuclear submarines from the bottom of the ocean, especially if we have no idea where they are. He looked at M, expecting more. We don't necessarily believe that it's a question of mechanical failure. We have enjoyed the full cooperation of the United States Navy, whose tactical experience of this kind of situation is second to none, and we have found no trace of the Ranger. Are you suggesting that she's been destroyed by enemy action, sir? The line on M's face suddenly seemed to be etched deeper. Come here, James. I want you to look at something that arrived in the diplomatic bag from Cairo. M produced a scuffed leather map case and drew out a cylinder of tightly rolled translucent parchment. Bond moved to his side and looked down at the surface of the desk that had been specially prepared for his interview. Under a sheet of glass lay a chart of the southern Atlantic revealing the telltale bulge of the West African coastline. A thin black line zigzagged from north to south like the sales curve of an unsuccessful company. This is the course that Captain Talbot, commander of the Ranger, was following, said M, following Bond's glance. How many people knew it? The head of operations at Holy Loch and Captain Talbot. A copy would be posted to Supreme Defence HQ. So there's little chance of a leak. I would say none. M struggled with the parchment and eventually anchored it with his ashtray and an imposing, heavy leather pen holder and inkwell set that Bond had never seen him use before. Bond knew better than to try and help. Once the parchment was in what M considered to be a satisfactory position, he began to unfurl it laboriously. Bond watched patiently and saw a pattern beginning to emerge, identical to that on the chart, but out of true, like the 4-colour reproduction in a cheaply produced magazine. M extended the parchment to its fullest extent and edged it to the left until the two lines mated, one on top of the other. The line on the parchment stopped at a point where there was a cross on the chart, and the submarine's course had changed to the next unfinished leg of the voyage. "Interesting," said Bond. "You realise what it means? One of two things. Either we have a traitor, or someone can plot the course of nuclear submarines." M looked at his pipe and then put it in the copper ashtray. "Our communication from Cairo suggests the latter. This tracing is a sprat to catch a mackerel. Q, if he was not too busy designing rockets to be fired from ski sticks, could explain it better than I." It was easy to detect that M belonged to the old school. He did not entirely approve of Q's gadgets, as he was wont to call them. "He says there's something called heat signature recognition. I can't explain exactly what it is. I've always been out of my depth with technical gobbledygook. Anyway, it works on the same principle as satellites with infrared sensors that can detect a nuclear missile in flight by its tailfire. It seems that someone can now locate a submerged nuclear submarine by its wake." Bond felt the room growing colder. "And the people in Cairo, just what are they selling? Is Ranger... what's happened to her?" "We don't know," said M briskly. "We only know that someone in Cairo is offering to sell us a blueprint of the reputed tracking system. The whole thing may be a hoax. That's for you to find out." The plumbing work restarted on the pipe. "The Chief of Staff will fill in the details. As regards the disappearance of Ranger, you can imagine who the first suspects are." Bond could. Redland. "And don't forget, James," M broke off to strike a match, 16 Polaris missiles have a greater destructive potential than all the explosives used in the last war, including the atom bombs in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. They could blast this country into the earth so that the North Sea and the Atlantic met at Birmingham." As if in awe of M's speech, the rain subsided to a steady drumming. Bond looked at the grey sky and thought of the England that he loved with an intensity that was almost painful. "I'll get right on it, sir," he said. Chapter 5. Introducing Sigmund Stromberg. The room was large and splendidly furnished. The chairs in which the three men sat were deep and luxurious, and the cheerful gleam of the highly polished leather complemented the mirror sheen of the silver bowl tastefully arranged with dew-anointed red roses on the small glass and steel table between them. A heavy silver box lay unopened in the middle of the table and contained a mixture of Virginia and Turkish cigarettes, both tipped and untipped. Thick glass carafes rested upon circular green mats. At one end of the room was a charming Romney of two small rosy-cheeked children in Regency dress playing with a kitten. Two of the three men were dressed in conventional suits, and there was about them an air of respectful unease. The man before them on the other side of the table was different. What could be seen of him was enclosed in a loose-fitting black tunic that rose to his neck like a priest's surplice without the collar. Although he was more than average height, his features were small and his mouth exceptionally so. It was like a child's mouth, with the fat cupid's bow of the upper lip grotesquely dominating the lower. Had it been possible to turn the feature upside down, it would have looked better in the long, thin face, although its extreme narrowness would have always seemed incongruous. The short nose barely broke away from the bulbous upper lip, and one had to peer closely to see a pallid streak of near-white hairs above the watery blue eyes. The head was not prematurely bald, but had never grown hair, and the small ears clung to the head like suckerfish to the side of a shark. "Dr. Beckmann, Professor Markovitz." There was no trace of warmth in the voice. "We come to the parting of the ways." The two men looked at each other nervously and then studied the impassive face before them. Sigmund Stromberg had been conceived on Midsummer's Day in Appvorst, a small village in northern Sweden. There, the arrival of the longest day is still celebrated with dancing around the Maypole and much drinking and fornication. Sigmund Stromberg was conceived as an indirect result of the second of these pursuits, and a direct result of the third. His father was a fisherman, which may have had some hereditary influence on his eventual choice of career. Not an immediate one, though, because his father never married his mother, and as soon as the young Stromberg found himself anywhere, it was with an aunt of his mother's who lived a respectful distance from Appvorst. She was a kindly woman with no children of her own, and she and her husband lavished all the love and care that they could muster on young Sigmund. Neither name was his by birth, but bestowed by his new parents. Sigmund Stromberg was not a warm-natured child, but he worked conscientiously at school and became passionately interested in the sea. Not in ships and naval battles like other boys, but in life below the surface. He was fascinated by fish, and Frun Stromberg became disturbed by the long periods of time that the boy spent watching a fish tank in the window of a restaurant in the nearby small town of Magmo. Even on the coldest winter days, young Sigmund would be staring through the condensation at the speckled trout living out their last days, a look of rapt concentration on his face, his skin pinched to an onion pallor by the cold. When he was older, he obtained a piranha fish from somewhere, which he kept in a small tank in his bedroom. Frun Fomberg had no idea where the fish came from and did not ask. She was already rather in awe of her adopted son, as she chose to think of him. At night, Sigmund would take a flashlight and go out to seek food for his pet. Frogs, toad, mice, and shrews. These were its summer fare. One night, as she was passing his room, Frun Stromberg heard the agonized squeaks of a mouse and asked if it was necessary for the food to be fed to the fish while it was still alive. Sigmund assured her that it was. She did not believe him, but she did not argue, because when crossed, her son underwent a strange and disturbing metamorphosis. He would suck in his lips so that his mouth disappeared into his face to be replaced by a tiny dimple like a baby's umbilicus. His skin would turn a deathly white and his eyes suddenly filled with red as if the blood drained from his cheeks had rushed to fill their sockets. At the same time, he would wrap his arms around himself and shake in silent, inchoate rage. Frun Stromberg was frightened, the more so when she discovered Sigmund having one of his strange shaking fits before the fish tank. She wondered if he was working too hard at school. Reports were coming in that the boy was academically brilliant with a natural bent towards the sciences. His IQ was so high as to be unmeasurable. Herr Stromberg was an undertaker. Sigmund would stand in his father's workroom much as he had stood before the fish tank and observed the skills of the trade. The construction of the coffins, the linings, the woods that could be used, the styles and ranges of handles and accessories, the methods of presentation to the prospective customer. Although she was wary of mentioning it to her husband for fear of hurting his feelings, Frun Stromberg was worried that her son's obvious talents might be wasted if he went into the family business. She did not worry for long. Shortly after Sigmund's 17th birthday, the Saab in which she and her husband were travelling went out of control on a notoriously dangerous corner and plunged into a lake. Both passengers were drowned. Apparently, the brakes on the normally reliable Saab had failed. Sigmund Stromberg was phlegmatic in the face of the tragedy that had for a second time robbed him of parents, and won the respect of the neighbourhood by undertaking the funeral arrangements himself. His schoolmasters urged him to sell the business or take on a manager so that he could continue his studies at university and proceed to the brilliant future that seemed to be his right. He disappointed them by saying that he was going to devote himself to running the business. This he immediately began to do with great vigour, and for a young man he showed a remarkable conversance with death and what he described as its packaging. Cremation was what he advocated as the cleanest, purest and most ecologically satisfactory way to go, and as business prospered he built his own private crematorium. He had to wait rather longer than anticipated for this because the firm contracted to do the business were at that time engaged in building similar but rather larger installations in Nazi Germany. Stromberg became the man whose advice was always sought when there was a bereavement. Any man or woman of consequence would expect to be cremated by him or would know that in the manner of their going, the world would see ample evidence of their means. Stromberg specialised in the production of very expensive coffins with very expensive fittings. He argued, though with most of his clientele it was never necessary to argue, that the consecration of so much wealth to the flames was a kind of absolution, a purification of the body physical from the taint of mammon before it passed into the everlasting twilight. It was the equivalent of the old Norse heroes being burned in their longboats. It also showed the world that one had money to burn. Most clients, racked by emotion, pressed back a tear and nodded. It was only several weeks later, when the body of the loved one had been consigned to the flames and an enormous bill had arrived, that some of them thought again. But who could query and who could quibble in such a situation? And anyway, what was there to discuss? Everything had been passed into the furnace. In fact, only the corpse had been burnt, usually without any gold fillings that its teeth had contained. The same coffin, which was designed like a Japanese trick box to be capable of a number of subtle variations of shape, was used again and again with a variety of gold-plated handles. Stromberg realized that few people attended so many funeral ceremonies that they would recognize one coffin from another. Some wives even assisted him by expressing a wish to be cremated in the same style of coffin as their departed husband, and this instruction he was able to fulfill to the letter. Once the electrically controlled rollers had carried the coffin through the curtains and the hardened steel shutter had slid shut, the record of a blast furnace in operation would be turned on and the corpse quickly tipped into a plywood box reinforced with struts. The coffin would be swiftly dismantled and the corpse examined for items of value. Any fingers containing rings that had become moulded into the flesh would be chopped off and the rigid mouth prized open. If it contained any teeth, and they in turn contained gold, these would be wrenched out with a pair of pliers. The funeral assistants would then withdraw, and the true furnace sound would overlay the recorded roar preying on the minds of the mourners as they sped with restrained haste from the ghastly place of death. It was on this grim Fertilizer that the seeds of Stromberg's fortune had flourished. With the end of the war, he moved his business to Hamburg, where the opportunities for expansion were so much greater. But his mind was already on other things. Most of Europe's merchant fleet had been sunk during the war, and Stromberg was swift to see the possibilities as martial aid began to pour in to help the stricken continent to its feet. He moved his money into shipping and was soon on smiling terms with Greeks as his first shabby cargo boats gave way to tankers. By his middle 20s, Sigmund Stromberg was a dollar millionaire. But this was not enough. As he became richer and more successful, and as his net of power and acquaintance extended, Stromberg realized that the world is not controlled by kings or presidents, but by criminals. Kings and presidents are ephemeral. Organizations like Cosa Nostra and the Tongs go on forever. So Sigmund Stromberg decided that he had to become a criminal. The transition was not going to be too difficult after all. He was already a swindler, a murderer, and a corpse robber. His opportunity arose when he learned that a number of established criminal interests had agreed a plan to sell insurance based on annual tonnage carried to one of the richest Greek shipping magnates with whom Stromberg had a bare acquaintance. Stromberg exaggerated the extent of his connection with the Greek and committed himself to convene a meeting at which the proposition was to be discussed by all interested parties. The meeting to take place on the Ingemar, at that stage the largest tanker in the Stromberg fleet. To keep a respectful distance, Stromberg arranged that the meeting should be under the chairmanship of one Bent Kroll, who had been his right-hand man in the early crematorium days and knew all his secrets. The decision not to attend was, as it happened, the right one, because an explosion ripped apart the stateroom in which the meeting was due to take place seconds before the arrival of the Greek. Bent Kroll and the leaders of 8 of the most important criminals in Europe were wiped out and the ship turned into a blazing inferno. It was fortunate for Stromberg that the vessel was well insured. Those who were in the know believed that the Greek had caught wind of the plan and taken his own retaliatory measures to nip an incipient protection racket in the bud. It therefore came as no great surprise when 2 months later his chauffeur started the Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud and saw his legs passing his eyes as an explosion carried the vehicle, his master and himself to a height of 45 feet before depositing their mangled remains in a smoking crater half that depth. Stromberg had sent a wreath to the funeral. His taste in such matters was, of necessity, exemplary, and 3 months later, by a series of very complicated but very logical deals, had taken over the dead Greeks' shipping interests. Now Stromberg's cold, watery eyes flowed over the 2 uneasy men before him. Gentlemen, there is a problem. Chapter 6. Room 4C. Stromberg allowed his words to sink in and stroked a web-like fold of skin that stretched between the smallest finger of his left hand and its neighbour. He had been born with this, and Frun Stromberg had been eager to have it removed. However, even this simple operation had been beyond the family's means when Sigmund was an infant, and as he grew older and more assertive, he had absolutely refused to undergo the surgery. He even affected the mannerism of dosing the finger and thumb of the right hand round the translucent curve of flesh and tugging at it ruminatively. Sir, with respect, surely the technical... Stromberg silenced Beckmann with a gesture. The problem is not of a technical nature. I have nothing but admiration for the work you have both carried out on the submarine tracking system. The first stage of its exploitation has been conspicuously successful. He paused. Perhaps too successful. Perhaps it has encouraged thoughts of covetousness and greed. Small beads of sweat appeared on Markovitz's forehead. To put the matter in a nutshell, gentlemen, Stromberg continued, I have discovered that we have a traitor in this organization. Somebody who is even at this moment engaged in trying to sell the plans of your tracking system to competing international governments. He raised an arm with a lazy swimming motion and extended a long bony finger behind his right shoulder. My assistant will be able to throw more light on the matter. Fetch the evidence, Miss Chapman, from the safe in room 4C. The girl who appeared from the shadows had been sitting quietly taking notes since the meeting began. She was tall, dark and slim, and by any standards beautiful. She wore that look of haughty disdain and scarcely veiled contempt which is the hallmark of all secretaries of the rich and successful. Her black dress with the little white collar was so simple that it had to come from one of the more discreet Paris fashion houses, and she moved with the casual aristocratic grace of a purebred Saluki. As she left the room, Stromberg watched her approvingly. Room 4C was long and narrow and painted a brilliant, almost blinding white. The girl had never been in it before and was surprised to find it empty. She had supposed that this is where Stromberg kept papers too secret even for her eyes. As she walked through the door, she was startled by a high-pitched buzz and a red flashing light at the far end of the room. She stopped, then relaxed. It must be some kind of security device. Stromberg had sent her here, so presumably it was safe to proceed. Drawn by the light, she strode down the room towards what looked like sliding doors. The safe must be behind them. Suddenly, there was a solid clunk behind her. She whirled. The door had shut. As she started towards it, there was a whir of machinery and a partition fell from the ceiling like a guillotine blade, missing her by inches. The room had shrunk to a quarter of its original size. The girl began to panic. She jabbed a finger against what she hoped desperately was an alarm button. Apart from breaking one of her long, beautifully manicured nails, she achieved nothing. There was no sound of a bell ringing. Instead, the doors slid gently aside. She was face to face with an expanse of glass that stretched from floor to ceiling. The girl shook her head, unable to believe what she was seeing. Behind the glass was water, hundreds and thousands of gallons of it, and fish, brightly coloured tropical fish, darting by singly or drifting in shoals. The girl shrank back against the far wall. It was eerie down here with that enormous pressure of water behind the glass. What was happening? Had the complex electrical system that powered Stromberg's headquarters finally broken down? Supposing the glass broke? She screamed, and the noise reverberated around her prison and echoed in her ears. "Stay calm." She said the words out loud and peered across the tank to see if she could make out where she was. In the murk, something moved. The girl saw what it was and screamed again. The nose appeared first, like a streamlined shell, then the small pig eyes, then the whole fish. It was a great white shark. The girl shrank back in terror, and the shark sped towards her. She caught a glimpse of the 2 rows of jagged teeth set back beneath the pointed snout, and then the fish keeled away, its white belly nearly brushing against the glass. The girl sank to her knees and started to sob hysterically. What did this nightmare mean? What in God's name was happening to her? Crack! The sudden jolting noise was like someone freeing a window that has become frozen by frost. The glass before her lurched and water burst into the room at floor level like a sluice gate being winched up. The water splashed against her knees and she screamed and scrambled to her feet. Her desperate hands thrust against the glass and tried to push it down, but it was a pathetic, useless gesture. Her fingers slid down the glass as it remorselessly continued to force its way upwards, and the rising tide of rushing water drove her skirt above her lovely legs and soft, unplundered thighs. She screamed words that had no meaning and offered no hope of salvation, and as the water rose above her shoulders and her bruised head beat like a cork against the roof, the light went out and a loud speaker crackled into life. "It is you who betrayed us, Kate Chapman, and you will pay the penalty." The water closed above the girl's head, and the shark turned and sped in for the kill. In the room above, the figures of the 2 children in the Romney painting shivered as if in sympathy with the fate of the girl, and then moved obediently to one side. Enclosed within the ornate gilded frame of the painting was now a revealed television screen. Beckmann and Markovitz sat with the sweat of fear sticking to their bodies and watched the screen as if hypnotized. The shark had the girl by the thigh and was worrying her like a bone. A disgusting pink candy floss of blood spurted in all directions. For an instant, the shark's head filled the camera, and it was possible to see the triangular saw teeth grinding their way through the white bone, the terrifying glint of incontestable purpose in the small, evil eye. Then the leg came away from the body and dropped slowly to the floor of the tank, leaving a corkscrew spiral of blood. The shark chased it for a moment, and then turned like a whiplash to snap its mouth above the girl's waist. There was an impression of the girl's suppliant head jerking forward, the long black hair smeared across the face, the arms pushing vainly against the brutal, gut-ripping maw. And then the stomach burst, and the horrifying carnage on the screen was mercifully obliterated in a thick red cloud. The silence in the room was broken by a soft purr as the Romney slid back into place, and 2 sweet and wholesome 18th century children beamed down upon the 3 men in the room. Beckmann fought a desire to be sick, and Markovitz wiped the sweat from his forehead with a wide bandana handkerchief. The red slowly oozed from Stromberg's eyes, and his mouth regained its normal shape. During the television transmission, the 2 men sitting on either side of him had been aware of an increased pattern of breathing from their employer, and on one occasion a long, sibilant hiss. Nevertheless, no sum of money on earth would have induced them to turn and look at him. The horror of the television screen was enough. "Gentlemen," Stromberg's meticulous enunciation brought the head swinging dutifully around. "Is there any other business?" The words toppled one after the other like giant dominoes of ice. He rose, and neither of the men spoke. "Good. Then you are free to leave." When the 2 men had hurried from the room, Stromberg returned to his chair, made a note on his pad, and pressed one of the switches on the small rectangular console in front of him. He inclined his head and spoke calmly. "Send in Jaws."
There we go. Very interesting. We're going to have to wait a little bit before we hear from Jaws. Not that he's got much to say. Let's go back to chapter 4. This is chapter 4. Now, I'm very jealous that you got to read that bit out, because that's my favourite part. Nearly always my favourite part of any of the films or any of the books. Is the bit in M's office. I love that. I love the atmosphere of it, and I love that kind of the sort of role that they have. One's clearly the superior, but the other one is the blunt instrument that does all the hard work. So they equal each other. They sort of complement each other very well. And I always find it fascinating the sort of wordplay that they have when they're talking to each other, and the mission is being set up. And you got to read that bit, and this is a very good scene. I thought
it's.
If you've not read this before,
No. Doing this is the first time I actually read this book, but
So, what did you think of that chapter?
It feels very Fleming-esque. I mean, the only I feel like he got it. It's like a lot of the times when you read a Bond continuation novel or anything like that, your first question is do they really get it? Like when I read M saying something, does it sound like what M would say, or is it something a bit different? Does it sound like what Bond would say or Moneypenny might say, and all the rest of it? But for me, most of this feels exactly right. The only thing that made me go a little bit like was the talking about shooting the rockets into the mountains and all that kind of stuff, where M was talking about that, and I was just like, that feels a little too much like your Roger Moore Bond film rather than your Fleming kind of stuff. I don't know, but it was, other than that one comment, I feel like it reads pretty much just like a Fleming M scene, I think. What about you?
Yeah. One of the things that the book doesn't do that the film does is include the character Q. The films invented the character Q. There was always a Q branch in the novels, and there was a Major Boothroyd who was mentioned in at least one of the novels. But the character in the film of Q, who does a lot of the more technical explanations, doesn't appear in this book, because this is attempting to carry on from the Fleming series. So suddenly having this old chap in tweed pop up and explain things, I think wouldn't fit with the continuity of those books. So a lot of Q's dialogue from the film is given to other characters, and M is given some of his dialogue at the beginning about the tracking system and how the submarines are caught and how they can be tracked using the wake and all of that. And yes, that probably explains why the M in this scene is saying things that he probably wouldn't normally say.
That's a good point. Now, why do you think he did that and he didn't just bring in Boothroyd? Bring in the armourer, bring in Boothroyd. Would that not have been the right way to go?
I suppose he could have. I can't remember, outside of Dr. No, I can't remember Fleming using Boothroyd again. Does he?
Do you know what? We should know this, and we'll have to go and investigate that. I tell you what we always like to do. If there's something that requires a lot of research, let's throw it out to the JBR family, because there's bound to be somebody out there who's just recently finished reading all the books or something. Let us know. When do we see Boothroyd? Obviously, we see him in Dr. No. Does he crop up regularly after that? What's the deal? It's been many years since I've got that far through the Fleming stories. Actually, I need to. In fact, the very last one I read was Dr. No. So yeah. That's as far as I've in my recent memory that I take that. But yeah, I think I feel like the relationship between Bond and M, bang on. It feels right. Bond fiddling with his pipe and all the rest of it. The feel of it is bang on, I'd say.
Did you say Bond fiddling with his pipe?
M fiddling with his pipe. Maybe I said Bond by mistake. Obviously, M fiddling with his pipe.
We don't want to see Bond fiddling.
Absolutely not. No.
it's interesting that I think it's in Moonraker, the book, when at the beginning M is about to ask Bond to do a mission, but it's not even a mission, it's a personal favour. It's try and investigate how this guy he knows at his bridge club keeps winning. He thinks he's cheating. This is unofficial business, and he's a little embarrassed about asking him to do this. So he keeps referring to him as James.
Yeah.
Not Bond, not 007. This is not official. He keeps calling him James because he knows. And Bond says he's aware that every time his superior starts calling him by his first name, that it means that there's something up. So he's always a little suspicious when he keeps calling him James. And yet in this chapter, he calls him James an awful lot. And it does suggest that he's about to say, look, I'm sorry about this, James, but my TV antenna has come off and I haven't got a ladder. Could you come around later on and fix it for me? Because he doesn't call him Bond very much. He doesn't call him 007 very much. It's so you found Q's gadgets useful, did you, James? I don't think he would do that. I think that's a little odd.
That's an excellent observation.
Don't forget, James.
That's one of those things. If you're tasked with writing a Bond book, that's one of those details that you need to get right in it. To really nail things. That's a very good observation, man. I like that.
Well, it's one of those things that sets up the sort of barrier between them. There's a reason why they can't. There's a reason why they don't both nip out to Rules and have a beer afterwards with each other. It's because one is the boss who lives behind that desk, and the other is one is the brain, and the other is the hand, and they don't mix. There is this this sort of level of officialdom between them that you can't ever mix the two together. And he would never call him Miles. Bond would never call M Miles, would he? He'd never sort of jab him in the ribs. Let's go for a pint, Miles. It wouldn't work. So I thought that was a bit odd, but it's only a little thing that I noticed. What was the other thing I noticed? It's always raining. It always seems to be raining in these scenes.
Well, that is our beloved British Isles, man. That's one of the reasons why I try and spend as much time away as I possibly can is because of that very thing. So yeah, I feel like he's nailed that one 100%. If there's one character he's nailed in this book, it is the British Isles themselves. But there you go, weather. Absolutely. Now,
do you think that he does that to make the? Do you think Fleming did that to try and make the other parts of the novels seem even more exotic? If you say that the building is a grey slate building and there's horrible grey skies and it's always pissing it down outside, and then suddenly you have to go to Jamaica, it makes the reader go, oh wow, I can't wait, I'd love to go to Jamaica, that'd be amazing. He never says it might be raining in Jamaica, it's the wet season. It's true. Always this you're stuck in this horrible boring desk job, horrible weather outside, dull tiny little island, but you can live out this amazing fantasy in the next couple of chapters if you disappear to an amazing warm exotic location with beautiful beaches and incredible women. That seems to be I think that seems to be what they're setting up, so that he's Christopher Wood's carried that on by having it pissing down.
Absolutely. Good. Some excellent observations there. Now, before we move on to the next chapter, I have some questions for you. How was my Bond voice to you as a Bond fan? Did I pull him off all right, or I was very nervous about doing the Bond voice? Was it all right? Part of me was like, shall I do the whole Bond voice like that? And then I thought, no, that's not the way to go, because I couldn't carry that on for a whole chapter, and B, it just didn't feel right. But did I do all right, man?
Yes, I think you did very well. Yes, I think you did. I think you did extremely well.
My other struggle was with M as well, because when I first started doing it, he came out like Edward Fox's M in Never Say Never Again. He was, oh, do come along, Bond, that kind of thing. And I thought, no, again, I can't carry that on for a whole chapter either. So I just made him a little bit raspier than Bond. And just to get a bit of difference there. But yeah, what's going to be interesting is obviously as we're alternating sections of the book is whether my Stromberg voice matches your Stromberg voice, your Bond voice matches my Bond voice, and how it goes through. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, I think.
Well, you described your Stromberg as coming across like a mixture between Hugo Drax and a vampire.
Yeah. Which
I thought was a very, very nice way of putting it. It's suggested that he is Swedish in the book. Yes. We're skipping ahead a chapter here, but it's suggested that he was born and brought up in Sweden, so therefore he would have a slight, I assume, a slightly Swedish accent. I mean, Goldfinger didn't have a British accent, but he was British. Yes, if there's a sort of happy midway point between a generic European accent and something approaching what Kurt Jürgens did, then I think that's, in most people's ears, would probably be the voice of Stromberg. Stuff. Yeah.
So I suppose as we move into the next chapter, then the most interesting one of the most interesting talking points, because there's quite a lot of good talking points here, is the title of the chapter itself, introducing Sigmund Stromberg. Now, what's this Sigmund all about, Dan?
Yeah. Again, that's Madonna, isn't it?
It is. God damn it.
Sigmund Stromberg. Analyze this. This is a different character to the one that we see in the film. He doesn't look like him. He doesn't sound like him. Like, if you can figure out how someone sounds from a novel, it's very easy from the description that we are given to picture someone other than Kurt Jürgens.
Yeah,
definitely. He's described like loose-fitting black tunic that rose to his neck like a priest's surplice.
Yeah,
surplice without the collar. He was of a more average, although he was of more than average height, his features were small and his mouth exceptionally so. It was like a child's mouth with the fat Cupid's bow of the upper lip grotesquely dominating the lower. Had it been possible to turn the features upside down, it would have looked better in the long, thin face, although the extreme narrowness would always have seemed incongruous. And it says he has a short nose. He was bald. He was not prematurely bald, but the hairs had just never grown, and he had tiny ears that clung to the side of his face like a suckerfish on the side of a shark. He
doesn't sound like the most handsome of gentlemen, does he? And I feel like he's almost like making him look a bit fish-like when you describe like that mouth.
Yeah.
You know, it's like with the upper lip dominating the lower. It's like he's got some sort of guppy face going on. Yeah. That's what he's going for there, I think.
Again, he's tried to give an unfair advantage to Bond by describing him as being cool and lean and hard and cruel, and the villain as being this grotesque sort of human shark thing. But I think the films being what they were at the time, they decided to cast someone who they thought could do the job and was a name. Nowadays, they probably would have cast someone who they could then manipulate to look like that character in the book. They would plaster them with makeup, or they would do, like Bill Nye in the Pirates of the Caribbean. They'd put all the little dots on the face, and they would CGI that makeup on afterwards. But it's once you start reading this book, it's very easy to picture someone other than Kurt Jürgens. It's a very unique character. So the fact that he's got a different name kind of helps. It's not Karl Stromberg, because he's not German. It's Sigmund Stromberg. He's bald, he's tall, he looks very strange, and he sounds like a vampire, according to you. So yeah, it's right. It's quite easy to picture a completely different character.
I think you're absolutely right. I think it's the fish-like face, the fact that he's a Sigmund, and we get quite detailed Strombergian backstory, don't we? We get the fact that obviously his real father was a fisherman, and then he's later adopted, and his adopted father is an undertaker, but he has this super, high level intelligence, and his whole kind of like history of his career brought up more or less up to date before he gets into the world of shipping and stuff. I thought it was quite interesting how he had that whole crematorium business where it would be like fake cremations where he would stick him in a coffin that was, he'd charge loads of money for, and then as soon as it was behind the curtain, that would be taken away and reused for the next person, and they'd have all their valuables torn from their body, whether it was rings or gold teeth or whatever, and melted down. And then it would just be kind of like that on repeat. I thought that was quite like a nasty but kind of interesting backstory at the same time.
Yeah, it's a bit Sweeney Todd, really, isn't it? Like slicing people open, turning them into pies, and then carrying on as normal. You got this horrible criminal pastime going on in the background, but you've got a very legitimate face to the front of it all. It's a. I'm sure there's somebody out there that's done that.
Yeah,
there must be more than one organisation.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of references to Nazi Germany and cremations and stuff there. So there's a kind of foot in reality there with what went on during the war and stuff as well. But and it basically says there the boy was academically brilliant with a natural bent towards the sciences, and his IQ was so high as to be unmeasurable. So that's quite interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. So does it ever explain exactly what's happened to him to make him come out the way he has? What is it that's made him become this horrible sociopath? Why doesn't he talk to people? Why doesn't he get on? Why is it just because he's more intelligent and he can't find someone that he can relate to? Why has he suddenly gone down the criminal route?
When you're like that next level clever, there's always that trade-off, isn't there? I don't say always, but there's often that trade-off where they're so clever but they have no social skills or something like that. Or do you know what I mean? It's that right. Or they're that clever but they can't work out how to make a bowl of Frosties. There's always that sort of, with the super intelligent, there always seems to be that other balance. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I can relate to the not having the social skills, but if there was a Bond villain who was as thick as shit and had no social skills, I could probably attempt to do that. Yes, it is interesting though that something has clearly happened in his life that's made him go, I'm going to go this way. I'm going to be an intelligent, super nice person, and become a doctor and figure out all these cures, progress the world of science in that way. He's actually gone down the Hitler route. He's decided the world is not how I see it, and therefore it must change. And there's a soundbite that's going to get nicked and misinterpreted on the internet. Everything needs to change from now on. I think I don't know, maybe in later chapters it might explain, I can't remember, it might explain what it was that made him go down that route. But in those early chapters, I don't think it is. He's just born evil.
Maybe if you're born with a face like a fish, like that, with a guppy mouth, that it just sets you up to be, not the most friendly of people.
If by the time you're in your mid-teens, you're happily feeding live mice to piranhas, that's a sign, I suppose, isn't
absolutely. it? Absolutely. But interesting chapter.
Probably need to get out more.
Interesting chapter, nonetheless. Though I think there's a lot of a lot to be gleaned from that you don't get in the film for sure.
Definitely, yeah, and also it's interesting. Now, is it this chapter or is it the next one? Let's have a look. Yes, the very beginning of chapter 6. There's another difference between Sigmund and Carl Stromberg. And that is, well, let me read it. Stromberg allowed the words to sink in and stroked a web-like fold of skin that stretched between the smallest finger of his left hand and its neighbour. He'd been born with this, and Frun Stromberg had been eager to have it removed. However, even the simple operation had been beyond the family's means when Sigmund was an infant. And as he grew older and more assertive, he had resolutely refused to undergo the surgery. He even affected the mannerism of closing the finger and thumb of the right hand around this translucent curve of flesh and tugging at it ruminatively. So this was like the way some people would sort of fiddle with their earlobe, or, you know, play with their hair, or twirl it or whatever. He has this little flap of skin here, and he's just sort of constantly tugging at it. And that's it. Whereas in the movie, he is a full-on fish man, isn't he? He's got webbed fingers. You barely see them. It's only in a couple of shots where they really highlight the fact that his fingers are completely webbed. But you could miss it, and I certainly missed it when I was watching it as a kid. It wasn't until I'd read about it that I went back and saw, oh yes, he really does.
I must admit, I was exactly the same. I never clocked the fact that he had web fingers in when all those years, and it wasn't until reasonably recently that again, same for me. I read about it and then was like, oh yeah, and you just kind of clock it a little bit in the film. It's never referenced. It's never like made a thing of at all. But it's it's quite interesting, isn't it?
Is that maybe because the films are a bit more outrageous, and that might be a step too far for a serious novel? To explain that a man who's obsessed with the ocean and living underwater just happens to have been born with webbed fingers. That's just a little bit too far for a novel that is, you know, from all accounts, a far more subdued and adult and darker toned novel than the film is. So he is mentioning it. He's mentioning it he's putting it in there, but he's explaining it away in a sort of a reasonably low key. Yeah, way.
Absolutely. Now I think this next chapter, Room 4C, is really nasty. Right. This is obviously This is, as you get in the film, Beckmann and Markovitz are there, and Stromberg does the same thing of saying, you know, somebody in our organization is betraying us and blah blah blah. And instead of sending the beautiful assistant into the lift and then pressing the button and down she falls into the shark, we have things to play out slightly differently, where it's kind of the same idea, obviously, but it plays out a little bit differently, where she walks down into the long dark room, and then the kind of the walls come down. And she kind of sees the shark, and then the sort of the fish tank kind of wall starts to come up, and the water spills into the room bit by bit. So it's kind of like the other way around. She's kind of just standing there, and the room floods and lets the shark in rather than dropping her into the shark, which I thought was interesting. But the way this is written, man, it's very, very dark and quite brutal, isn't it?
Certainly, her demise is pretty grim. Yeah, it's never explained where they are at this point in the novel, so I think that's the last thing that the audience, the reader, was expecting. For you just assume they're in an office somewhere. It doesn't explain that they're on Atlantis. So whereas in the film, it's made very clear that they're on Atlantis because it's risen out of the water at one point, and you see the outside shots of it, and you see. Yeah, it's you see tanks of fish around him, and it's sort of explained where they are. Whereas in this, there's no explanation at all. So the moment you hear that there's a great white shark coming towards someone, you think, how the hell is that possible? So again, like the opening chapter where you don't quite know who Sergei is, you think it might be Bond, and then he goes, "Haha, I fooled you." It's a similar sort of thing. The last thing the reader was going to expect was... It's like the scene in A View to a Kill where would you like to step outside for a moment and anyone else care to drop out? You don't know that they're in an airship until you realise they're in an airship. So it's a similar sort of thing to that, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's the author springing a surprise.
Yeah, I think the funny thing that struck me about that is obviously he's obviously saying, somebody's betrayed us in the organization and stuff. And then he sends her off to room 4C, and then obviously she's getting a little bit freaked out when she first goes in there, but then thinks, oh, it must be okay because Stromberg, sent me here. But then at the same time, if she is genuinely the person who has betrayed him, then surely she would be thinking, oh shit, he must have found me out. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Do you think maybe she was the wrong person?
Maybe. That's what I'm thinking, because you would have thought she, as soon as he started talking about, a traitor in their midst, you would imagine she would start to sweat a little bit if it genuinely was her that was the traitor. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But yeah, man, a really dark and nasty kind of, like this line, for example: the shark had the girl by the thigh and was shaking her like a bone. A disgusting pink candy floss of blood spurted in all directions. Ew. Yeah.
It's the stomach bursting.
No, that's another horrible bit. Yeah, absolutely. But we get her name as well, Kate Chapman, which I don't believe we get in the film. Do we get her name in the film?
Yeah. No, we don't. Again, it's one of those bits where a book can give you information that a film just doesn't have the time to give you.
Absolutely.
You've got 100 and whatever it is, 200 pages to play with, whereas a film's only got so many minutes, and some of that's taken up with things that you see rather than are told. So unless she had a name badge on saying, "My name is Kate, I'm here to help. Welcome to the Stromberg Laboratories," you'd never know that.
Absolutely.
It's just unnecessary. You don't need to know it, but a novel can take the time to do that.
Yeah, there's this weird thing that Stromberg does as well when he's kind of like, when he's getting a little bit aroused from the death. Like there's that thing where the blood runs into his eyeballs as well, isn't there? Like that's weird, isn't it?
It says when he gets angry, his face sort of folds in on itself. His mouth becomes very small, and his eyes. All the blood rushes to his eyes, and he starts to sort of, you can tell when the bloodlust is getting to him, when his emotion is changing for the worst, because he seems to sort of puff up like a pufferfish, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's or like a cuttlefish or an octopus. He just he changes colour.
Yeah. Yes. So there's that thing of like you're disfigured or somewhat kind of different villain. Your Bond villain has something different about them, like you were saying. This time he's got a face like a fish, and literally when he gets all like the bloodlust comes up, literally all his blood runs into his eyes. So I imagine from the description, like he's literally, the whites of his eyes turn red, and then after she dies and the kind of the screen goes back down and all the rest of it, it says the red slowly oozed from Stromberg's eyes and his mouth regained its normal shape. So it's kind of like, that's very different to what we get on screen, isn't it? Like if that was ever an idea during the writing process of the film, that was dropped at some point, which I think is quite a terrifying vision, actually. I remember when I was a kid, my granny had a little problem with her eye, and that the same thing happened where the whites of her eyes turned red for a little while until it healed. And I remember she looked absolutely fucking terrifying it for those like couple of weeks where she had that going on. So I imagine with old Stromberg, that would have been quite a scary thing, maybe too scary.
There's certainly plenty of things in here that, had it been the other way around, had the film been an adaptation of the book, there's no way they could have got away with some of the things that they've included. Because the film would have been, I don't know if you remember in the 80s when there was the sort of video nasty scare where anything that even seemed slightly adult was either censored to pieces. The BBFC in the UK was incredibly over the top with their censorship in the 80s and 90s. So certain films would have, are just banned completely. They can't have that. This would have, if License to Kill was nearly an 18 until they softened it to make it a 15. If they filmed this the way it's written, it wouldn't have been Wouldn't have
No.
been allowed. It's in certain chapters of this book, it is just hideous. But because it's text, you can get away with it.
Absolutely. Interesting, yeah.
It is very interesting.
So,
Also, there's something that they noted that they did that was different. Now, again, I don't want to give away anything from another possible future book, but this they had a German actor. They had Kurt Jürgens playing Karl Stromberg. They obviously thought a German actor with a Swedish name wouldn't work, so we can't call him Sigmund. Or maybe that was Christopher Wood's original plan, and he thought, well, sod the fact that they've got a German actor. I'm going to stick in this novelization. I'm going to stick to my original character. He's going to be Swedish. A similar thing has happened in the Moonraker novelization. There's a character who flies Bond around in a helicopter, who he then seduces and gets the information at Drax's chateau. She's not called Corinne. She's called Trudy.
huh.
And can I remember her surname? It might be Parker. It might be Trudy Parker. She's blonde. She's Californian. And when they cast the film, they obviously thought, well, we can't not have Corinne Clery because she's amazing. So rather than look for someone who resembles the character that was originally written in the script, we'll just change her name. We can't have her called Trudy if she's French and she looks like a Corinne. So we'll just change her name. I think that's probably what they've done. It's a similar sort of thing. Maybe when it came to writing the novelization, Christopher Wood said, no, I always pictured this character to be a Californian. I always pictured her to be blonde, so I'm going to write her my way in the book, and we'll go that way in the film. That seems to be what they've done with Stromberg here.
Are you still there?
I am still here.
Beautiful. Can you
Are
just
you
tell me
still
what
there?
the last thing was you said? Because I lost you halfway through the Corinne Dufour thing.
I've got a frozen picture of you.
Cool. You've been frozen for me for about half an hour, so it's all good.
All right. Yeah, I think I think they had a similar concern with the film and the book of Moonraker. They've decided to go with. It looks like they've decided to go with a certain character in the novelization and cast someone who was right for the role in the film, but not necessarily exactly how they were envisioned originally. And that's exactly what they've done with Stromberg.
So that's maybe if this one goes down well, maybe a natural sequel to this to these Spy Love Me episodes will be to do the Moonraker novelization at some point as well. That would be quite interesting.
We could do, yeah. Yes, that's also an interesting read. I have to say, I think this one is the better of the two, but it's still a very interesting read.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we finish up then, obviously, with Beckmann and Markovitz being sent on their way. Stromberg picking up the phone. 1 sentence, 3 words, send in Jaws. So there's a little bit of a precursor to what's coming up next, isn't there?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't mind admitting that when I was a kid, I caught the end of The Spy Who Loved Me on TV. I was watching it with my dad. I was quite fascinated by what was going on. And the end credits rolled, and it said, underneath James Bond, Major Impassive, it said Jaws, as the credits were going up. And I turned to my dad, having just seen the ending of the film, and I said, is that the same Jaws that was in Jaws? I thought that was the shark. I thought it must be the same shark that was in the film Jaws. Did they get the same shark to play the shark in the end of this film?
Oh,
he said no. It's probably the guy that they were talking about. The guy.
Yeah.
So yes, if you hadn't seen the film and having just seen a great white shark rip somebody's stomach out, and then the guy turns to his telephone and says, "Send in Jaws." it's possibly suggesting that, it's possible that some of the dimmer readers might have thought that the shark was going to be doing all the killing in this book.
Yeah, interesting.
And that he was going to be sending the shark around wearing a little moustache, a raincoat, and just be knocking on the door on the train compartment and just
causing all sorts of trouble. Absolutely. So that's where we're going to put the pin in the story today, and we're going to continue with the next 6 chapters next time. But I think this is a lot of fun, Dan. I feel like even having obviously read through it ourselves and then sitting here and discussing it as well, I think it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of enjoyment to be had from going through this process. Would you agree with that statement?
I hope so. I hope people find it entertaining. They may not. They may find it horrendous, but I'm going to keep at it anyway, because we started now, so we might as well. I think if anything gets people to pick up a book or a novel that they haven't picked up and read in the past, that's a good thing. So if this hasn't come out in print for a long time, certainly in the UK, it did come out as an ebook a couple of years ago, but I think even that's now difficult to find.
Yeah, that's been withdrawn.
And it's never come out as an audiobook as far as I'm aware. And again, it may be a rights issue, so that's kind of why we're doing this. But if it ever does come back, for goodness sake, don't hesitate to buy it, because A, that's giving money to the people that give you the Bond entertainment, and you should be paying them. But at the same time, if it looks like it hasn't been a success, they won't bother bringing back old stuff again. Yeah. So, spending a couple of quid is like your way of saying you appreciate the effort that they've gone to reprint something. And everyone should own this book, because it is a terrific novel. It really is. Despite the fact that I've been murdering it, it has been a very strong favourite continuation novel for me.
Absolutely, yeah, same here. It's one of those things where I'm having a lot of fun reading it through now, but at the same time, I kind of wish I'd have discovered this a little bit sooner as well, because it's something that I've always had a copy of this floating around, but for whatever reason, I've just never sort of dug into it. So yeah, and of course, yeah, like Dan says, if you're enjoying this, then go and grab a copy somewhere. I'm sure you can jump on Amazon and get a version of it somewhere, and follow along with us.
It is on Amazon, and it's very easy to find on eBay, because there's a lot of them around. You can get it for 50p. What you can also get on Amazon, if you're interested, and I'd be very interested to hear from any JBR listeners who have already got this, is Christopher Wood's own autobiography. Now, have you got that?
I haven't. Is that the one called The Spy I Loved?
Yeah, I think it was self-published. It came out a couple of years before he passed away. Because it was self-published, it's never been reprinted. And at the moment, on Amazon, it's going for £134.99. So if anyone has a copy and they don't want it and they want to sell it, for less than £134.
Absolutely, yeah. Especially if you want to sell it to us for around 50p, like the novelizations, then that would be a bonus. But other than that, yeah, just let us know if there's any interesting nuggets. Because ultimately, if you've called your book "The Spy I Loved," then obviously, there's going to be some heavy levels of bondage in there to get your teeth stuck into.
You'd hope so. I mean, there are reviews of it on Amazon, and it's mixed between people saying it's really good and others saying it's not that good. But I think because it's self-published, it didn't go through all the sort of the benefits of having proofreaders and things like that, and editors. So yeah, it's probably an interesting nugget, but not much more than that. Whether it's worth £134, I don't know.
That's another story. Absolutely. So that's the end of today's Spy Love Me discussions. And I've had a very, very good time. And obviously we're going to continue it next time. In 2 weeks' time, we're going to do the next Music of Bond episode where we're going to be looking at Live and Let Die, and then we'll be back with part 2 of The Spy Who Loved Me. Like I say, if you haven't already, go and grab yourself a second-hand copy of Christopher Wood's The Spy Who Loved Me so you can follow along with us. And just for the sake of the people who are listening and not watching, Dan, tell the people what's on the wall behind you, because you've got quite a cool poster behind you there, haven't you?
If I do that, does it look like you're interviewing Roger Moore?
Oh, if only you'd been sat there holding a gun like that.
Say that. What was the question?
The poster behind you, just for the benefit of the listeners and not the viewers. What have you got behind you there?
Can I slowly move out of the way? That is a poster that was drawn by an artist and a blog poster by the name of Peter Lorenz, who runs Illustrated 007. It's called illustrated007.blogspot.co.uk, and he runs a blog where he posts up any sort of traditionally painted imagery, whether that's book covers or posters or the boxes of toys and jigsaw puzzles and packaging and things like that. Anything that illustrates Bond in a sort of traditional style. Mm-hmm. And he's a big art fan himself, and he's a very good artist, and so he does a lot of his own original Bond artwork and sort of tribute artwork. And that was a poster that he had done, which is an amalgamation of several different artworks that he had done from Russia with Love, but it's done in the sort of Thunderball movie poster style.
Yeah.
He was selling off large full-size prints for a while, so I bought one of those because I thought it was terrific.
It does look amazing. I was just I tweaked it. And I was trying to when you first signed in, I could just see the edges of it around your head, and I was like, which poster is that? I can't quite make it out. And it's and there it is. It's obviously an original piece. So that's wicked. Yeah. So illustrated007.blogspot.com.
Yes.
Go and check
Peter
it out,
Lorenz.
Everybody. Peter Lorenz.
Yes.
Excellent stuff.
I think he's a genius. And I'm sure we can try and get hold of a decent sort of JPEG of it, which we could put up on the webpage.
Lovely.
So people can see it in
Sounds
detail.
Good. All right, good stuff. Well, I've had a lot of fun today. Have you had a lot of fun today, Dan?
Yeah, I really need a wee though.
Yeah, me too. This is always the way. These podcasts take long. You're always chatting for longer than you expect to be. So it's always a bit of relief when you finally do sign off, so you can go and relieve the bowels, so to speak. And
the bowels. Yeah. Oh, you didn't mention the bowels. Them too, huh?
Absolutely, double barrel. But yeah, of course. So JBR will return next week with the Music of Bond, Live and Let Die. And then, of course, we'll be returning with Spy Loving Part 2 2 weeks after that. Until then, I've been Tom Sears.
He has, and I've been Dan Gale.
And we will see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.